This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate first part of what if Naruto was trained by Deidara after Land of Wave arc. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Damn ninjas. You killed our meal ticket. You guys are dead. Now we're gonna pillage this city, and take anything of value. The mercenaries and thugs gathered in front of Team 7 were the source of those yells and cheers. The bodies of Zabuza Momochi and Haku were the only things standing between the Konoha nins and the unruly crowd. Naruto turned his suspicious eyes to his squad members. He could see the fear that seeped into Sakura's eyes as she supported a battered Sasuke, dreading the impending battle. Meanwhile, the final Uchiha was on his final leg. After the beating he had sustained during the altercation with the Hyouten user, it was truly astonishing that he was already conscious again. Fighting off Zabuza had taken a toll on the man's body, and his sensei had also seen better days. And now they have to contend with about 200 more men whose sole motivation was to pillage and murder. The blonde hero quickly made his favorite hand sign with his fingers. With all of his remaining chakra, he used multiple shadow clone jutsu to create 10 more blonde genins, prepared for the impending battle. The gang of thugs on the other side of the bridge also appeared to have started at this point. The men in the rows began to move, hurrying in the direction of the 11 blonde-haired ninjas who were now in their way. The identical-looking children waited for attackers to approach them while holding weapons in their hands. When shuriken and kunai began tearing into the enemy ranks, the advancing mass of enemies came to a sudden stop. After striking their targets, many of the metal weapons disappeared into smoke. However, Naruto and his clones would run out of ammunition before the steel hail could last much longer. The rain of weapons stopped as soon as it began, and the remaining thugs attacked again. A good dozen of their enemies had been killed and another dozen wounded by the blonde genin's counterattack. Now, the original and the clones were waiting for the approaching onslaught in a line, each with a kunai in their right hand. An anxious Naruto yelled, "Sensei, I could use some help here, Dabbeo," toward a motionless Kakashi Hitaki. "Sakura, protect Tazuna and Sasuke, I will help Naruto." The one-eyed Jonin hurried over to his blonde charge after saying those words. He no longer had any chakra left to support his Sharingan eye, which was already hidden by his leaf headband. Standing alongside the original and the 10 shadow clones, he, like his pupil, pulled a kunai from one of his pouches and waited for the approaching adversaries. The two sides engaged in a violent altercation, and the thugs who were rushing forward were once more halted. Cries of agony and agony filled the silence as metal clashed. The actual conflict had only just started. Kakashi began tearing through the bandits' ranks like they were nothing, taking them down one by one despite his own exhaustion. The only thing on the battle-hardened shinobi's mind was to end this battle before he was too exhausted to move, and those inexperienced men posed no threat at all. Conversely, Naruto was beginning to struggle with the adversaries. At the beginning, he and his clones had taken a few early blows, but now several men had cornered them all. In addition, he lacked the years of experience his sensei had to level the playing field. After being struck, his clones gradually disappeared into smoke clouds, leaving only the original. About 10 of those damned mercenaries were gathered around a panting Naruto who stood in the center of a small circle. Little splatters of blood were streaming down his body from a few shallow wounds where their weapons had struck him. Laughing loudly, the young shinobi asked, "Is that all you got?" The boy's expression brightened as he realized the impact his words had on the barbaric adults in his immediate vicinity. With a butcher knife in his hand, one of the thugs charged forward and tried to hit the blonde genin horizontally. The nin drove his left leg deep into the attacker's stomach after the kunai in Naruto's hand blocked the attack. The man lost consciousness and fell to the ground after he keeled over in agony. Unfortunately, this action created a gap on the left side of the Jinchuriki, which one of his adversaries had noticed. An underhanded mallet strike struck Naruto's left torso, propelling his tiny frame upward with the attack's overwhelming force. Before crashing with his back slamming into the bridge railing, he flew in a high arc over the crowd below. Naruto's world darkened after that. Many of the first row of battling thugs flinched as a hail of arrows fell in front of them, and they began searching for the perpetrators of this new attack. The majority of the villagers, armed with hatchets, spears, and crossbows, were visible on the opposite side of the bridge. "If you come any further onto our island, the citizens of this country will stop you with everything we've got." In order to gain a better position in combat and give himself more breathing room, Kakashi broke away from his current skirmish and moved between those two groups. With his weapons drawn and facing the assailants, he was prepared for anything that might happen next. As the mercenary ranks moved, a gloomy-looking man emerged, carrying a battered orange-clad body with him. He had his left hand firmly wrapped around the unconscious Naruto's throat. Only the hard grip of one hand kept the boy from hanging freely above the dark sea as the thug lifted his limp body over the railing of the bridge. The stern voice of the man who held Naruto's life in his hands reverberated throughout the bridge. "Let us pass or this annoying brat pays the price." As soon as Naruto's senses returned, he became aware of the tightness around his neck. He began shifting and wriggling his entire body right away in a fruitless attempt to get himself free. Unaware of the true danger of his predicament, he intensified his attempts to escape. "Hold still, idiot." The thug gave Naruto a hard slap on the cheek with his right hand. The genin almost immediately took his chance and sank his sharp teeth into the attacking man's hand, something he had not considered. The mercenary released his hold on the boy's throat with a cry of agony, and gravity began to act right away. "Naruto!" Shouts of panic erupted from the top of the enormous bridge as the body of the little nin plunged down to the roaring sea. There was a loud splashing sound as Naruto's body struck the water's surface. As the low tide pulled the struggling genin's body seaward to the horizon, the onlookers could only watch in helplessness. Beneath the blanket a tiny frame stirred. He just woke up for the first time in days, shifting to the left and right in his sleeping position. However, he was unfortunate enough to have slept in a hammock rather than a regular bed. Unceremoniously, the boy landed on the hard wooden floor beneath him. It's not the most pleasant way to awaken. What the hell? Naruto sat up straight and began to scan his surroundings. He couldn't recall this place at all, so something wasn't right. His gaze lowered to his own body. Where were his distinctive orange garments? He had changed out of his jumpsuit and was wearing a white shirt and dark blue pants. Naruto asked no one in particular, "Where am I? What am I wearing? And why does this room sway back and forth?" "You are on a ship, kid. The big lady, that's her name, I'm her captain. One of the finest cargo vessels you can find in the elemental nations," was the proud response that the blonde received. "We fished you out of the sea, your hideous orange clothes saved your hide. Got really lucky with that, otherwise you would be dead by now." Naruto's eyes strayed toward the rough voice that had addressed him. An elderly man, likely in his 50s, with gray hair and a beard, a patch over his left eye, and nearly identical clothing to what he currently wore, caught his attention. The sea dog laughed loudly and said, "Remember why you thought it would be a good idea to take a swim that far away from the mainland?" The blonde's mind flashed back to the recent battle on the bridge. He instantly leapt from a seated position to a standing one while clenching his fist in the air. "I need to get back to the land of waves, TT Ibeo. My team is counting on me." The boy's antics made the sailor laugh. "Sorry kid, but we are already far away from that place. You were out 3 days and nights, whatever happened back there is already over. The next stop is a small port town in the land of lightning, we need to restock supplies there. After that the lady heads towards the land of water." "But," Naruto attempted to object, but his statement was interrupted. The blonde's final response before the captain left the cabin, leaving the boy to think alone, was, "No buts shrimp, be happy that you are alive, it's either lightning or water, the choice is up to you." The ship arrived at the port town in the land of lighting 5 days later, and Naruto made the decision to disembark if he wished to go back to Konoha. Since the land of fire and lightning country were connected by dry land, he could at least walk there. He would still have to wait a few weeks to return home. Although Naruto's survival was guaranteed by his extraordinary luck, the majority of his possessions were lost. Gamma Chan, his leaf headband, and roughly 2,000 ryo were all that remained of him. A map would probably not be such a bad investment, and hopefully that would be sufficient to purchase a few supplies for the lengthy trip home. In any case, the captain of the ship had given him 3 pairs of white shirts and blue pants, which were the same uniform that the ordinary sailors wore. It was a beginning. There are a few warehouses in the harbor area and roughly 100 buildings in the city, if you dare call it that. Naruto quickly located a store that sold supplies and other items, typically to passing sailors, but it was more than adequate for his needs. He purchased a map of the elemental nations, a black backpack, and a few rations that included water and canned food. Naruto stood on the western edge of the town, prepared to depart after spending his last remaining funds on the essentials of his journey. He raised his hand and pumped his fist straight into the air, his headband firmly grasped. "Konoha, wait for me. Uzumaki Naruto is coming home, Dadbeo," he exclaimed. Following that brief emotional outburst, he securely stored his priceless forehead shield in his backpack. Wearing the Konoha symbol while passing through one of the other major countries wasn't the best idea. Before long, he was moving steadily in the direction of his native country. Naruto had been in Lightning Country and embarking on his journey home for 2 days. The best landmark he had for orientation was the coastline, so he headed west along it. The blonde had purchased a map, but regrettably, she had overlooked the fact that it was nearly useless without a compass. Only major cities and capitals were marked, and it lacked the detail necessary to include smaller landmarks. There were cliffs and escarpments along the coastline to his left, and a softwood forest to his right. Since the beginning of his journey 2 days ago, he had only seen this. Now, Naruto was especially appreciative of the survival lesson he had learned in the academy. Locating food and water, pursuing small animals, laying traps, starting fires without matches or lighters, and constructing a shelter out of leaves and branches. He had benefited greatly from those lessons in the past few days. Naruto muttered to himself, "When I get home, I have to thank Iruka Sensei." His thoughts strayed to Konoha, his senseis, and his allies. Boom! The blonde boy was startled out of his reverie by a loud explosion. The majority of people would flee or at the very least avoid such a scene, but not Uzumaki Naruto. His curiosity overcame him, even in a foreign country on hazardous terrain, and he cautiously stalked in the direction of the source of the sounds. As Naruto moved toward the center of the chaos, he heard a few smaller explosions. After arriving at the designated spot, which took a minute or two, he hid behind a tree and observed the events taking place in front of him. 4 men stood in a wooded clearing, one facing the other 3. It appeared as though a massive explosion had occurred in the center of the clearing because there was rubble everywhere. The top layer of earth had been forcibly removed, and the grass had burned on the edges. All 3 men were wearing the same outfit and stood in a triangle. They wore a dark gray shirt, black pants, a white flak jacket over the shirt, a bandana the same color as the shirt with a metal headplate sewn into it, and dark black glasses that covered their eyes. The village symbol on the metal plates was unfamiliar to Naruto. He now wished he had paid more attention to Iruka Sensei's teachings. Since it was the most sensible option, he could at least presume that these were Kumogakure shinobi. Their opponent was a blonde man with half of his hair pulled back in a ponytail and the remainder hanging loosely from his head, covering one eye. The most unusual thing he wore was a floor-length, auburn robe that hung loosely around his body, hiding even his hands. As their adversary stood there contentedly grinning, the 3 ninja were already panting heavily. He raised his arms, and his hands emerged from his robe sleeves, forming a series of quick hand signals. He finished the blonde nearly immediately after beginning, and then he gestured toward his adversaries with his outstretched palms. Strange mouths appeared to have been implanted in his palms. They spat out several white batches of an unfamiliar substance. The batches immediately formed into tiny birds and raced in the direction of the 3 nin on the other side of the clearing after emerging from the mouths. Those 3 made every effort to avoid the strange objects, giving the impression that they had already encountered them. Ultimately, though, their efforts were in vain because the odd birds repeatedly struck the 3 of them. Each time one of the flying creatures struck one of them, the target was stained white. "Katsu!" was shouted loudly, breaking the stillness. Smoke rose around the 3 ninjas facing the lone stranger as another round of explosions shook the clearing. Naruto saw them all lying on the ground with severe wounds to their flesh and ripped clothing once the view became clear again. All 3 were dead, or would be dead in a few minutes, he was certain. The young Konoha shinobi were truly shocked to witness such a vicious yet successful demonstration of power. The blonde man said, "I know you are there, come out of your hiding place, He didn't even glance in the direction the genin was hiding. Naruto was startled by the victor's voice. He gathered himself and entered the clearing, realizing that it would be useless to hide any longer from such an enemy. He was making every effort to look as strong and courageous as he could. With a faint trace of fear in his voice, he questioned, "Are you going to kill me, like them?" The other blonde genin merely shook his head. "Those 3 ignoramuses and I had some sort of quarrel. They mocked the beauty of my work, so they had to pay for their insults." After taking a deep breath, Naruto realized that his life was not in danger. There was a slight, sly smile on his face. "You know, those explosive things you did with your hands are kinda cool." You like my art, kid?" "Art?" The Jinchuriki found the stranger in front of him incomprehensible. Wasn't art something like paintings and the like? "Art is an explosion, was the young blonde's first response. The genin could only nod. He had never heard that explosions could be considered works of art, but he found the odd explanation to be appealing. Not to mention that explosions are truly amazing, they were lovely in their own right. With his characteristic hyperbole, Naruto exclaimed, "Then yes, I like you art, that was so cool," and gave the demolition expert the thumbs up. At least this guy recognized the beauty of his art, and the bomber began to warm up to the blonde kid in front of him. "The name is Deidara and who you are?" he asked, reaching out to shake hands with Naruto. They clasped their hands together. "Naruto, Uzumaki Naruto, the future Hokage of the Hidden Leaf, TT Ibeo." Deidara shook their hands and then gave Naruto a close look. Given that he was born, reared, and trained in Iwagakure, he would typically be cautious of a Konohagakure shinobi. Iwa and Konoha had been at odds for a very long time, almost since the founding of both villages. The tiny blonde ball of energy in front of him, however, was very different. He was among the few who appeared to genuinely appreciate his handiwork. Since leaving his own village years ago, the missing nin had not encountered someone like that. An excited Naruto begged, "Could you, show me how to make awesome explosions like you do?" He wouldn't have another opportunity to learn something so amazing. Deidara adopted a severe demeanor and stared intently into the blonde's blue eyes. They continued to stare at each other for a number of seconds. The bomber finally said something. "If you want to follow the road of the true artist, I could show you a thing or two, I presume, It had been 10 weeks since the tragic event in the Land of Waves. After the other members of Team 7 returned from their mission, the Hokage declared Naruto Uzumaki MIA. The Konoha residents had been warned by the village chief that he would not put up with any kind of celebration for the demon brat's alleged death. At the moment, Azumo Kamizuki and Katetsu Higane, two Chunin, were on yet another dull shift watching over Konoha's main gate. Katetsu glared angrily at his partner. "Why do you always volunteer the two of us for this ridiculous duty, Azumo?" The response he received from his friend was, "Because it's an honorable work to do for the village. Furthermore, it's mostly quiet and safe here. Any problem with that?" Katetsu put his head in his hands and moaned, "Your modest attitude is so not helping us becoming Jonin any sooner." Why was this man once more his best friend? Both guards were startled out of their reverie by a loud cough. The voice in front of them trotted monotonously, "Genin Uzumaki Naruto. Ninja registration 0.1.2.6. 07, announcing my return from prolonged absence." Throughout his entire speech, Katetsu responded with barely concealed rage, "That joke is getting old, brats. The Naruto kid is surely dead by now." By this point, some of Konoha's kids had discovered that it was amusing to pull the gullible gate guards a few times with the "Naruto is coming home" trick. The stranger nearly yelled at the two dim-witted Chunin, "I am Uzumaki Naruto, Datbeo. How else would I know my ninja registration number?" Now that they were both examining the figure more closely, they could see that he somewhat resembled the missing genin. In case the real Naruto returns home, they were given a picture of him to use as a comparison. The gatehouse had that picture pinned to one of its walls. Katetsu and Azumo gazed intently at the photo before turning back to face the blonde man who had spoken to them. He must have experienced a growth spurt during his absence if this was indeed Naruto Uzumaki. In front of them, the boy had grown to a new height of roughly 1.55 meters. In comparison to before his absence, his hair had grown a few centimeters and now appeared even more spiky and wild. They couldn't see his right eye because of two stooped, blonde spikes. He was wearing a floor-length auburn robe with a light gray Uzumaki spiral sewn on the back. The robe was now zipped wide open, with a continuous zipper on the front side. Naruto was dressed in a tight-fitting mesh shirt, dark orange and black Shippuden style pants, and a belt with several pockets that was fastened around his waist. A black metal rope with a camouflage-colored monocular attached hung loosely from his neck, resembling a pendant of some sort. He held a black backpack in one hand, and his blue eye gazed impatiently at the two gate guards as he awaited their response. When Naruto finally had enough of waiting, he channeled some chakra, pulled up his mesh shirt a little, and used his free hand to make what appeared to be a ram sign. An intrinsic dark black seal pattern began to spread out around his navel almost immediately. He moaned angrily, "So, do you believe me now, or want to have a nice face-to-face chat with the grumpy fox?" Both Chunin could only give a stupid nod. The first to regain his voice was Azumo. "Hokage Sama said he wanted to see you immediately, should you return." "Then I'm on my way again." Naruto's voice sounded much happier and more at ease once more. His disposition had immediately improved following his encounter with those gate guards. The blonde turned abruptly, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and began to make his way to the Hokage Tower. As he traveled through his hometown, a tiny smile appeared on his face. He was at last back. Even though his most noticeable feature, his whisker marks, was still quite noticeable, people didn't seem to recognize him. Perhaps he didn't look like himself at all because of his new hairstyle and the different outfit. It was a welcome change that they didn't stare at him or make fun of him. He was certain, however, that this new behavior would not last long and that things would eventually return to their previous pattern. After walking steadily for about 15 minutes, Naruto had finally arrived at his destination, with the enormous Hokage Tower directly in front of him. He rushed through the halls and stairs until he eventually saw the old man's office entrance. Wearing the traditional Konoha Chunin uniform, two ninjas stood on either side of the large door. Just in front of the entrance, Naruto paused and grabbed the handle. One of the guardians yelled, "Where do you think you are going, brat?" Naruto's response was brief and straightforward, "The Hokage has requested my presence." By this point, the guard appeared visibly irritated by the blonde boy. "And who do you think you are?" The genin tied a leaf headband around his forehead after removing it from one of his belt pouches. Even so, half of his right eye was still hidden by the two long spikes of his blonde hair that hung over the headband. He began talking while looking directly into the sentry's eyes. He entered the office before either of the men could respond, saying, "Uzumaki Naruto, now if you excuse me, the Hokage is waiting." The blonde greeted the Konoha leader as soon as he entered the room, saying, "Good day, Hokage-sama." With his smoking pipe in his mouth, Hiruzen Sarutobi was seated in his chair, going over some documents. He looked up at the newcomer as soon as he heard the greeting. Since he wore a leaf headband, the person initially appeared strange, but the Hokage couldn't recall anyone who would dress in such a strange way. He could swear he knew someone with that kind of unruly blonde hair. The Hokage recognized the person who had entered his office as soon as he saw the ocean blue eyes and the scarred lines on the cheeks. His smoking pipe dropped from his lips and hit the table with a loud crash. "NN Naruto?" the elderly Sarutobi asked in a trembling voice. A big smile was fixed on the Jinchuriki's face as he said, "You've got it, old man. It has been a while, hasn't it?" In order to recover from the shock of seeing someone he thought was dead, the Hokage took a few moments to gather himself. He got up, put his hands on the wooden table in front of him, and began yelling at the genin after he had recovered from his worst moment. "Where the hell were you?" It was all he could do not to laugh as he responded to the Hokage with this nonsense. "Oh, here, there, and everywhere." The old man struck the wooden table with his fist. "That's not the time for your silly jokes, Naruto." Sarutobi's voice was so angry that it was almost as if he had unconsciously let some of his murderous intent out into the room. Despite this, Naruto didn't even shiver. It was great to see the Hokage again. "Get a grip on yourself, old man. No need to fly off the handle, TT Ibeo." Even though Naruto had so far enjoyed the show, it would probably be better if he finally answered the Hokage's questions. The blonde genin got a knowing nod and went on, "You surely remember how I have gone missing, don't you?" If he could avoid it, Naruto hoped the Hokage would be satisfied with this brief explanation. "A cargo vessel fished me out of the sea, took me 3 days to regain consciousness again, and then the captain dropped me off somewhere in Lightning Country. Nowhere important, just a small port town. I can't even remember the name of the place. The rest then was just walking home, and it only took me the next 8.5 weeks to get back to Konoha. Anything else you want to know?" The village chief's first question to the blonde was, "How did you gain money while traveling?" "Did some freelancing, taking out bandits, guard duties, transporting things and easy stuff like that." Although Sarutobi was somewhat taken aback by that casual response, it wasn't shocking. Since he was 5 years old, Naruto had to keep an eye on himself, and he decided that working as a freelance ninja was preferable to being a robber or thief. The Hokage asked naively, "Did you meet anybody interesting while traveling the world?" Naruto dreaded talking about that subject. Now he had to tell the old man a lie directly. He wouldn't rat out his travel companion, but it wasn't avoidable now. Flashback around 5:30 a.m., it was early in the morning. Naruto and Deidara had already packed up everything they owned and were prepared to continue their journey after camping here yesterday evening. The missing nin was sitting on one of his clay birds when he said, "We are about 5 or 6 hours away from Konoha. Our ways part here, With a dejected expression on his face and an almost pleading tone, Naruto attempted to persuade the blonde bomber, "Can't you come with me? You would like Konoha, I promise, Dabeo? We talked about it, didn't we? Even if I could come with you, you would raise hell onto Konoha for housing me. Also, you know I don't really like Leaf Ninja. You are the exception, my little apprentice." The young man breathed deeply. "Don't tell anybody that you traveled with me. Your village won't like it, especially once they find out that their Jinchuriki was influenced by some random missing nin." The blonde genin pumped his fist into the air to emphasize the statement, which he genuinely believed in. "You aren't some random missing nin, Dei.ni.san. You're the world best demolition expert, at least till I surpass you." Given how much Naruto had changed over the previous 2 months to resemble his younger brother, Deidara grinned at his antics. He gave the other blonde one last ruffle. The clay bird then took off, turned sharply, and flew steadily in a direction that would take him far from Konoha. "Just promise me you won't tell anybody about me. I don't want you to get hurt, and never forget." His role model began, "Art is an explosion, TT Ibeo," and Naruto completed it. He then started to walk in the direction of the Leaf Village, eventually making his way home. He was still thinking about the one who would influence his life more than anyone else. Kai flashback. He hoped the Hokage would be satisfied with his response. Not really, a few bandits here and there, but they didn't stand a chance against the almighty Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto genuinely wanted to know if his team had survived the Wave Country, so he said, "Hey old man, did my team survive the Wave Country?" in the hopes that it would divert the Hokage's attention. After your demise, Team 7 and the villagers were able to drive the mercenary force away. There were no further causalities on their side. A sigh of relief escaped Naruto. Our client even honored your sacrifice, naming the bridge after you. The Great Uzumaki Bridge sounds good, I would say. Naruto smiled proudly upon hearing that news. Could you please tell Tazuna and his family that I'm alive and well? The elderly leader nodded slightly before taking a long drag from his pipe. There is something else we need to discuss. Naruto, I can't place you back into your old squad. The blonde boy didn't even sound shocked when he asked, so my vacant spot had already been filled. That was what he had already anticipated. Back then, after you were presumed missing, my advisors brought to my attention that it would hinder the last Uchiha's growth if his team was incomplete. So another genin was transferred to fill in for you. Naruto adopted a contemplative stance and folded his arms across his chest. Which means I have no team and no sensei, just great. But this is where you are wrong. I can't place you back into your old team. There is however a free position in the squad, from where I took your replacement. The room was filled with a loud laugh. So I'm my replacement's replacement? That's almost ridiculous. Who are my unfortunate teammates then? The Hokage declared almost ceremoniously, as of right now, you're a member of Team 8 led by Kurenai Yuhi. Your new teammates are Shino Aburame and Hinata Hyuga. You can meet them later on today. 4 p.m., Training Ground 40. 2. That should be everything, for now. Naruto bowed slightly and said, understood, old man. After taking the second step toward the door, he turned around, prepared to go, but he stopped suddenly. He had nearly forgotten a crucial subject, but now he remembered it. Something else on your mind? Turning around, the blonde genin gazed intently into the Hokage's eyes. It would be an understatement of the year to say that Naruto's eyes were cold. He was obviously no longer in the cheerful mood he had been in just moments before. The temperature seems to drop a few degrees throughout the room. His tone and manner of speaking were menacing, and he even insinuated a small amount of murderous intent to convey his displeasure with the information withheld from him. Why did you hide my heritage from me, Hokage? Sama, he asked. What do you mean? The elderly leader seemed composed, but that was just an appearance. He was actually pretty tense. What if Naruto had learned about his father in some way? He knew that would not go well for the Hokage. As he asked the elderly man, Naruto's gaze never left him. My family name isn't for show only, isn't it? I'm a member of the Uzumaki clan, originated from the land of whirlpools? He asked. On the first day of his journey with Deidara, he had discovered this. The subject of his family name somehow came up after Naruto had explained his entire situation and the bomber had agreed to teach him a few things. Flashback. A curious Deidara asked, you're an Uzumaki, right? So you are some kind of clan prodigy? The slightly agitated genin answered, clan? What are you talking about? I'm just a no-name orphan. No, hard feelings here, I'm an orphan myself, kid. But the Uzumakis were once a famous clan, before their destruction. The bomber was lectured. Naruto wasn't comfortable talking about this kind of subject. I have a name and it isn't Kid. So what? Probably just a coincidence that I have the same surname like some exterminated clan. The absent nin suppressed a chuckle. What do they teach you brats in Konoha? If you're named Uzumaki you are a clan member, simple as that. It's a sacrilege to use a clan's name if you aren't related. Nobody sane would dare to commit that crime. Naruto became interested in the current discussion because of the new development. You said they were destroyed, didn't you? So who would give a damn? He could at least hope that he was actually from that extinct clan. He had yearned for some sort of family since he could remember, and even if he was the last, it would still be family. Their former allies, their old enemies are the spirits of the dead themselves. Konoha and your clan were quite close by the way, once, before Whirlpool's destruction. Whirlpool? Was Naruto's well-informed response. Deidara's explanation of the Uzumaki clan and the land of whirlpools took up the next few hours of the journey. Ultimately, Naruto came to believe that he did, in fact, belong to a clan, and that the Hokage was responsible for that. Kai flashback. Sarutobi showed signs of relaxation. It wasn't as bad as he had thought. After all, he could manage this situation. You are right, you're an Uzumaki. Most probably the last one. That's the reason why I didn't tell you anything about your family line. I didn't want you to get up your hopes up to find any family members, because likely there are none. Furthermore, I couldn't risk that you would leave, searching the world for your family. You are important to Konoha, Naruto. I know that much already. Konoha won't let their precious Jinchuriki escape. He was about to scream. Naruto clenched his fists in rage and said, and the Uzumakis were destroyed by Iwa, Kumo, and Kiri forces during the Second Shinobi World War. His eyes were tightly closed as he yelled angrily, damn it, I had the right to know it. The Hokage inhaled sharply, bracing himself for the lie he was about to give the boy. I'm sorry, Naruto. In retrospect, I probably should have told you about it. I wasn't sure if you would understand it though. Your mother was an Uzumaki, a traveling kunoichi. You were born while she stayed in Konoha. She was killed by the Kyuubi during the rampage it caused. There are no known records about your father although. With those final words, Naruto departed the office. Thank you for the full story. I will take my leave then, Hokage. Sama. He wasn't sure if the tale of his parents was true. The Hokage had previously lied about his ancestry, but it sounded like a plausible scenario. The blonde genin had roughly 3.5 hours left before he was supposed to meet his new team after leaving the Hokage Tower. He wanted to go to his apartment complex, so he started walking in a particular direction. It's likely that someone else had already rented his room, but it wouldn't hurt to take a peek. People were staring and whispering behind his back once more, and the atmosphere around him was clearly different now. Either one of the guards had announced the demon's return, or they now recognized him because he was wearing a headband. He was openly glared at and insulted by some people. In fact, it was worse than usual. Perhaps he was still alive because he had the gall. After 20 minutes or so, Naruto was heading to grab a bite to eat. His suspicion had been correct. Someone else had already moved into his old apartment, and his few possessions had long since left. It wasn't as though he had lost something he held in high regard or something he valued. His priceless headband was the only item he owned that would fit into that category. Even so, it was painful to realize how much people wanted him gone. In order to improve his depressing mood, he had determined that a few bowls of ramen would be the best course of action at this time. Naruto entered Ichiraku Ramen, his favorite food stand, and casually ordered, 3 bowls of miso please. Coming up, the harried chef behind the counter yelled. After 2 minutes, the hungry boy was presented with 3 bowls of hot miso ramen. Tucci almost dropped his wooden spoon when he finally managed to get a good look at his customer. Naruto, my boy, is that truly you? Believe it, oh, how I missed you, godly ramen. Naruto ate his favorite dish after saying, Itadakimasu, quickly. Only the broth in front of him now mattered, and the boy completely missed the owner of the stand's question. Naruto told Tucci and the recently arrived Ayame about his adventure after he finished his lunch. The fact that their favorite client was still alive and well made them both very happy. Before meeting with Team 8, Naruto said goodbye and made his way to the last place he wished to see. Kurenai Yuhi was standing in front of the Hokage at the moment because an Anbu had told her that the village chief would need her. You have sent for me, Hokage. Sama. Indeed, Kurenai, I have finally found someone to complete your squad again. With just 2 rookie genin, Team 8's sensei was nearly overjoyed to learn that her team would not be able to take on higher level missions. For the past 8 weeks, they have only engaged in D ranks and routine training. With a hopeful tone, she asked, and who is my new charge? Uzumaki Naruto, was the prompt response she received. Everyone had assumed the boy was dead by now, so hearing those words completely shocked her. After that realization hit her, she took a few moments to gather herself before asking. When did he return? Where was he for the last 10 weeks? It took roughly 5 minutes for the former leader to update Kurenai on the entire Uzumaki situation. Hokage. Sama, isn't it normally a standard procedure for a shinobi, who spent so much time in enemy territory to receive a mind scan? The frantic Jonin concluded. Under normal circumstances you would be right, but you have to take his status as Jinchuriki into account. No Yamanaka has ever performed one of their techniques on a host, nobody could predict the results. I'm not willing to risk any shinobi for a task that could serious harm or kill said shinobi. The Hokage replied with a firm tone. So it's my new job to watch over him, looking out for any indicators that he is a threat to the village or even a possible spy. The Hokage handed her a folder containing documents and said, among other things, yes, here are his files, read them carefully, I await an update at the end of the week. The conversation ended with the statement, your meeting with him is scheduled for today, 4 p.m., Training Ground 42. To let her team know about their new friend, Kurenai went back outside the tower. She was certain that the arrangement would lead to problems. The blonde boy had already arrived at the final location he wanted to see before going to the training grounds, and he took a long look at the enormous building that held so many memories for him before entering. Naruto still had 2 hours until he met his new comrades. He cautiously made his way through the academy's corridors in search of the first grader's classroom. At last he heard the voice of Iruka sensei lecturing from one of the rooms. He made a quick ram hand sign with his hands, and a busty, smiling blonde bombshell wearing a form-fitting black bikini appeared in place of the male genin. He hurried into the classroom. Everyone's attention was drawn to the new student who had entered the room. "Did you miss me, Iruka-kun?" a seductive voice asked. The events that were taking place left said man speechless. He had to see this offensive jutsu again, so his first instinct was to yell. However, his mind froze when he realized the situation's implications, and all he could do was stare at the blonde woman. In between Naruto's raucous laughter, he said, "Think I broke him." The blonde genin, however, was also caught off guard when a blur nearly glomped him down. A panicked Konohamaru yelled, "Boss, you're alive," as he embraced his role model. The original Uzumaki Naruto appeared in place of the blonde girl as a cloud of smoke erupted around those two. Naruto, who was still laughing, patted the brown-haired child's head and said, "Missed you too, Konohamaru-chan." The academy teacher had finally recovered from his shock. "Class, you're dismissed early today." All of the students hurried out of the room after hearing that statement, leaving only Iruka, Naruto, and Konohamaru. The genin spent more than an hour telling his former sensei and unofficial student about his travels. While Konohamaru thoroughly loved hearing about his idol's adventures, Iruka was amazed at how well the blonde boy had behaved himself over the previous 2 months. As he had promised Deidara, Naruto never once mentioned his secret traveling companion. Naruto hurried to training ground 42 after saying, "So guys, I need to head out, meeting me new team. See ya soon," and jumping out of a classroom window. Konohamaru yelled after him, "Not fair, I wanted to see your new jutsu, boss." Situated on the outskirts of Konoha, close to the renowned and dreaded training ground 44, training ground 42 was a straightforward, grass-covered, rather large clearing encircled by a dense forest. At the moment, Uzumaki Naruto was seated in the center of it, cross-legged and deeply meditating. After nearly 15 minutes of delay, Team 8 had finally arrived at the designated meeting spot. The explanation for this was quite straightforward. 2 genin were informed by Kurenai that they would receive a third team member once more. When they revealed who their new comrade was, Hinata Hyuga instantly passed out, and it took a long time to wake her up. The blonde might be able to help the girl come out of her shy shell, but the black-haired Jonin wasn't sure if the Hyuga heir would be able to work well with her crush as a new teammate. Despite Kurenai's best efforts over the previous few months, she was unable to accomplish this. When the 3 of them noticed Naruto sitting in the center of the training area, they were all taken aback. He wasn't what they had anticipated. No loud boasting, no hyperactivity, no orange clothes, just sitting there motionless as a statue. The blonde looked up from where he was sitting and on to his new team. From his Jonin sensei to the stoic Aburame and finally to the blushing Hyuga, his eyes strayed over them all. Naruto said, "You're late," with a humorous tone. "Still not as bad as Kakashi Sensei though, only 15 minutes. Raising himself off the ground, Naruto began to approach his stunned team. He wasn't the best surprise ninja for nothing, but they hadn't expected him to greet them in this way. Kurenai was a little upset because the blonde had just made a comparison to the chronically ill Kakashi Hitaki. She knew that she needed to clear this up right away or else the blonde would think she had a habit like the one-eyed Jonin. Someone else spoke up before she could respond, even though she really didn't want to be compared to the lazy pervert. "We're sorry that you had to wait for us, Uzumaki-san. Why we were late, you may want to ask. Well, because something important had acquired our immediate attention. Although everything is perfectly fine now, so there is nothing to worry about for you." The Aburame responded with an extended response. In the meantime, Hinata made an effort to conceal her shame after realizing right away that she was the cause of Team 8's slight tardiness. She moved halfway behind Kurenai Sensei, her head partially buried in her coat. The blonde was still making his way over to the other 3 people who were in the training area when he said, "No need for formalities, Shino. Just call me Naruto, plain and simple." The always stoic Aburame responded, "I will try to remember that, Naruto-san." The addressed teammate could only shake his head in astonishment. When Naruto raised his voice once more, the 4 of them finally stood facing each other. Since most teams were specialized in one area, Deidara had asked him, "So sensei, What are the main functions this team normally performs? He was curious about how he would fit into his team's role. His new sensei gazed at the young boy in awe. Nothing in his files suggested that he was that perceptive. Perhaps his accidental field trip had produced some beneficial outcomes. Team 8 was formed as tracking and information gathering unit, mainly because the clan techniques of Hyuga, Aburame and Inuzuka were especially suitable for such tasks. Naruto nodded slightly before answering. It was funny to learn that his clones had a special ability, but it hurt a lot. My shadow clones should be able to help out with this goals quite good, especially with their ability to return memories to the user. Flashback in a clearing. 5 of Naruto's shadow clones stood side by side, their hands making the sign of a ram and their faces warped in concentration. When the 5 of them finally had enough, sweat was streaming down their faces. For the past 3 weeks, they have been practicing various ways to explode, but no tangible results have been seen. The irritated clone exclaimed, "Arg, we will never get this down guys, together." "Already giving up on art my pupil, Deidara said as she emerged from the woods and entered the open space. Angry at the lack of progress, the blonde copy yelled, "This isn't getting us anywhere, try it for yourself Dei. Sensei if you think it's so easy, TT Ibeo." The blonde bomber gave the copy's head a gentle pat as he said, "You have to work hard to understand true art. It took me years to reach my level of enlightenment, but don't give up the hope. I believe in your way of the artist, Naruto-chan." Deidara's gaze strayed to one of the other clones, who were still working hard to compress their chakra, as he suddenly sensed an intensification of chakra nearby. One of the 4 other copies was completely colorless, and his body appeared oddly warped. He would never see that again before the clearing was rocked by an explosion. Both blondes had made camp several hundred meters away, deep in the forest. On the forest floor, the actual Deidara and Naruto lie with their faces twisted in agony. Naruto exclaimed in astonishment, "Ow! That hurt. Hey wait, why the hell do I even know how it feels to be blown apart?" Kai flashback Kurenai gave a nod in agreement with the blonde's conclusion. "Your shadow clones will be a nice addition to the team. What I wanted to ask you is, how many of them can you make, Naruto?" After hearing the question, the genin appeared to be lost in thought before responding. "Between 45 and 60 who have sufficient chakra to be useful. Quite some more with the help of my tenant." The genin's ability to produce so many solid clones astounded the black-haired Jonin. It's likely that even the Hokage couldn't produce that many. But she was afraid of the Kyuubi, so she leaned forward and whispered in the boy's ear. "Are you sure you want to discuss your special condition before your teammates?" With a serious expression on his face, Naruto glanced at his sensei before turning to face his teammates. "If you allow it sensei, I would like to tell them about my burden. You should know that I used it subconsciously during my last mission, so they will see it sooner or later. If that moment comes, it is better for them to know about it beforehand, it could affect their combat readiness." Kurenai understood his logic and gave Naruto the response he was due. "You have my permission to tell them everything you want. After all, it's your secret and only you and the Hokage can freely speak about it without punishment." The conversation between their new teammate and sensei perplexed both Hinata and Shino. What sort of secret would they discover? Curious, they both waited for Naruto to share the story with them. With a voice devoid of emotion, the blonde declared, "I am the Kyuubi." The rest of Team 8 couldn't understand. Kurenai didn't understand Naruto's behavior. He must have understood the distinction between a prison and a prisoner. Shino believed Naruto was attempting to play a practical joke on them. Otherwise, why would he make such an absurd claim? What about Hinata? She knew that most people detested her crush for an unfathomable reason, so it made sense somehow. However, she was certain that he was not a monster of some sort and that he was obviously not malevolent. Konoha would already be on fire from everything they did to him if he was the nine-tailed fox demon. Naruto suppressed a chuckle. His face became much more severe as he said, "You should see your faces." The blonde inhaled deeply and said, "Okay, the fun is over, now on to the serious matters at hand. I am not the Kyuubi, as you have already guessed. But still the former statement had some truths in it. Whatever you think you know about the beast's demise is a lie. In fact, the Yondaime Hokage didn't kill it. How should he have done that feat in the first place? The Kyuubi is more or less just chakra with a consciousness and a physical form. And you can't kill chakra. So he did the next best thing. He sealed it away by putting the chakra beast into a newborn baby." Naruto glanced at his two teammates, who appeared to have grasped the concept. The blonde boy said in a heavy voice, "Yes, the Yondaime sealed the demon into me on that fateful day, the 10th of October, more than 12 years ago. I am Konoha's resident Jinchuriki." Naruto was hoping for some crass shouts or vile looks, but they never materialized. It appeared that both of his new friends were thinking carefully about what he had told them. Hinata's face was marked with a profound expression of sadness, while Shino's was unreadable. After closely examining Naruto's statement, the Aburame was the first to speak up and express his viewpoint. With a slight nod from the blonde, he went on. This is the reason you are generally disliked by Konoha's population, because they only see you as resurrected representation of the terrible nine-tailed beast. Naruto.san. You are no more the Kyuubi than I am a bug. Just because our bodies house some other living entity, it doesn't make us said being. Having remained silent during the entire ordeal, Hinata now completely understood why her idol was despised. She had to tell him that she only saw him because of the person he was. Not a demon, not the Kyuubi, or something else. The Hyuga girl spoke after gathering all the courage she could muster. S. Shino is right, and na. Ruto. K.Kun. You're just a normal human being with a terrible burden. In the following moment, an emotional Naruto embraced both genin. Thank you guys, you have no idea how much that means to me, Dadbeo. He was deeply touched by how readily they both accepted him despite being aware of his darkest secret. While the Hyuga heiress was dealing with other issues, Naruto's intense embrace had an impact on her. The brunette was already in danger of fainting, and her face had turned a deep neon red. She eventually lost consciousness as her eyes rolled back into her head. When the female teammate went limp in Naruto's arms and the blonde went into full panic mode over the girl's blackout, their sensei couldn't help but laugh. She was unsure of how to explain this incident to him, though, without giving him a glimpse of the Hyuga's emotions. The brunette had been dropped to the ground by a terrified Naruto, who was now attempting to rouse her from her unexpected coma. Given that her head was extremely red, he had placed one of his hands on her forehead to try to determine whether she had a fever. He then made an unsuccessful attempt to shake her awake. The Aburame's brief explanation, delivered in his monotonous voice, finally helped Naruto relax. Naruto.san, you should avoid close body contact with Hinata for now. She is an extremely shy person and it takes her a while to get comfortable around a new comrade, like you. Just let her rest for now, because she will wake up by herself eventually. The blonde was rubbing his neck sheepishly and had his hands behind his head. Remembering how Deidara had learned about his tenant, he said, I apologize for that, just got overwhelmed, I think. Flashback. Right now, the two blondes were strolling alongside each other across the land of frost, which resembled a tundra. 2 days prior, they had successfully traversed the boundaries between Lightning Country and Frost. Deidara unexpectedly revealed the shocking information to his gullible friend. You're a Jinchuriki, aren't you, Naruto? Immediately, the blonde genin stumbled and fell into the chilly dirt, landing face down. The boy appeared to be in a catatonic state at first, but he was back on his feet as quickly as he had fallen, looking into his counterpart's eyes with barely concealed fear. I don't know what you were talking about, Sensei. No need to lie about this to me. I had already contacted 2 demon hosts before I met you. One of them could even be described as my friend, so it's not like I would hate you for your burden, the perpetrator clarified. Naruto's expression brightened instantly. You don't hate me? You promise? A curious Deidara asked. Sure, I promise it, if that's what you want. So which one is it? The genin cautiously replied, the 9 tails, Kyuubi. How did you find out about it, sensei? The missing nin gave a loud laugh. Before continuing, Deidara took a deep breath. Really, Naruto, you can make an almost endless amount of shadow clones, while I barely can make 5. Then you have stamina like a herd of wild bulls, and lastly I have seen how fast your bruises and cuts heal after our training sessions. First I thought it was some sort of Kekai Genkai, but in the end the similarities to the other Jinchuriki I have met convinced me that you're one. Most hosts have greater chakra and stamina reserves than normal ninja and often some kind of special ability linked to their beast. Did you really think I would abandon you because of something like that? The boy's face began to well up with tiny tears of happiness. Naruto teared and said, thanks that you accepted me, sensei. The advice Deidara gave him that day was, cherish those who accept and understand you, kid, and try to ignore those who can't. They aren't worth your time. Kai flashback. Hinata spent roughly 5 minutes in dreamland before waking up. The whole thing made her feel ashamed. Naruto, however, reassured her that he was aware of her shyness and would make an effort to keep his distance from her until she felt comfortable enough to be around him. For the time being, the heiress could live with the arrangement. When everything had calmed down, Kurenai raised her voice once more. Are there any other skills I should be aware of, Naruto? I have learned tree and water walking. Furthermore, I have created a new technique while traveling. Naruto was thrilled. He already knew the fundamental chakra control exercises, so his new sensei was happy. She was also very intrigued by the new jutsu he had mentioned. Care to show me your new skill? The blonde shouted. Shadow clone jutsu, made a cross, hand seal, and nodded enthusiastically. Two more blonde genins stood in the training field in a puff of smoke. The two clones closely examined one another. Despite his apparent displeasure with this development, Naruto muttered something inaudible under his breath and destroyed one clone with a punch. The other clone made a ram hand sign as it dashed into the center of the clearing. After he closed his eyes, the training ground was rocked by a tiny explosion that was about a meter in diameter. The grass where the clone had stood was slightly burned, and patches of dirt were blown everywhere. This display shocked Naruto's two teammates, and even his sensei was confused. She was aware that the Hidden Leaf village had a somewhat similar method, but it was truly amazing that a genin could devise such a method. In contrast, Naruto was not happy at all. He yelled angrily, "My stupid chakra control really sucks." He made another clone in less than 2 seconds, and the copy was already en route to the location of the first clone's explosion. There was a significant difference in the second explosion. Dirt was blown through the entire clearing with a loud bang. Once the dust had subsided, the clone had been replaced by a circular area about 4 to 5 meters across, with the grass gone and the bare earth beneath it visible. That was beautiful. Ibeo was his current maximum explosion, assuming all went according to plan. All three of his teammates were staring at Naruto in disbelief when he turned to face them. Kurenai was perplexed because the second explosion was very different from the first, which was minor but still dangerous if someone got caught in it. Everyone within the blast radius would undoubtedly perish, and even further away, the explosion's debris would still be harmful. And it appeared to excite the blonde genin himself. If he could create a small army of clones that could all blow up like that, that could be dangerous. She began to speak in a firm tone. Naruto, you won't use this jutsu during training with your comrades. You could kill them easily with such destructive power. In fact, I want you to be really careful with this technique. Understood, sensei. Naruto calmly responded, understanding that he needed to use this jutsu carefully around other people and that it wasn't something to play around with. Now I want to know what was your problem at the first time and why did you rant about your chakra control? Asked his sensei. You see, Kurenai. Sensei, I have so much chakra that my control is really horrible. I hardly get the number of clones I want. Most times one more or less than expected appears. It takes me about 1 or 2 seconds to concentrate the chakra for the detonation, and sometimes, like in my first try, the explosion is just a dud. Naruto clarified his circumstances. The black-haired Jonin patiently said, I think I understand your problems. Anything else you want to show me? How about my first self-created jutsu, Dabbeo? Naruto was filled with excitement and joy at the prospect of demonstrating yet another of his abilities. Kurenai was pleasantly surprised by the blonde, saying, sure, why not? At such a young age, he already possessed 2 self-made techniques. Despite the fact that his grades indicated otherwise, he was most likely a diamond in the rough. Shino paled and Hinata flushed when they heard the words exchange. They both knew what kind of skill Naruto wanted to show off at this point. During the academy, they had witnessed the jutsu multiple times, primarily at the expense of Mizuki. Sensei. Their sensei would undoubtedly react negatively to this. There was a shout of, sexy jutsu, and then a blonde beauty standing in the clearing, hulled in smoke vapors. What kind of obscene jutsu was that? Kurenai went pale. The transformation vanished when she gave Naruto a gentle head punch. She yelled at her charge, are you some kind of pervert already? What use should such a jutsu have? The blonde held the little bump on his head and laughed sheepishly. He concluded with a few giggles as the boy recalled his past adventures. Hey, even the old man was knocked out by it. It's very effective against most men. The perfect prank jutsu indeed. The blonde was merely a mischievous person, not a pervert, as the Jonin sweat dropped. Even though he was somewhat corrected against most men, it could work pretty well as she still didn't like the concept of jutsu. She glared at him angrily as she spoke to convey the message. You won't use that thing while around me again, understood? The frightened genin gave a forceful nod. Won't do that again, understood, sensei. With those final words, Kurenai left the training area, and Shino and Hinata immediately followed, returning to the village. If this is everything, we will meet here again, tomorrow morning 8 AM for training. Good night, you three. At first, Naruto wanted to follow his new team, but he realized he had nowhere to go, so he stayed in the clearing. He began to lose himself in his thoughts. Where ought he to go? A hotel might do, but all the staff would do was stare at him sourly. The other choices were to go to the Hokage, who would arrange for him to have a place to sleep, or to ask Iruka Sensei for one. But did he really want to be totally dependent on someone else to take care of all his problems? His gaze strayed to his backpack, which he had set up beneath one of the trees enclosing the training area upon his initial arrival. He made his choice at that moment. He would live as he had for the past 2 months for the time being. He could use his sleeping bag to camp somewhere in the nearby woods. Although it wasn't the most comfortable option, he could train whenever he wanted and no one would bother him out here. After all, it's not a bad deal. It had taken Hinata 20 minutes to walk to the Hyuga compound. A tiny smile adorned the brunette's lips as she moved through the compound. She was in a very pleasant mood today. Naruto was still alive and had made his way back to Konoha, after all. The best part, though, was that he was now her teammate. Perhaps this would finally give her the opportunity she had been waiting so long for. She soon began to consider all of the new options that had become available to her. She was awakened from her reverie by Hiyashi Hyuga's firm voice. "Daughter, care to explain why you seem so happy today?" Hinata began to writhe under her father's icy stare. The young heiress stammered, "Ma team G. Got fin. Ally a third M. Member T.2. San." After a brief nod, her father resumed his conversation. "Can't you get rid of your annoying stuttering habit? This is embarrassing for a proud Hyuga of your standing. So who is this new teammate?" Hinata looked down. Her father had made fun of her once more. Shouldn't he have been more encouraging? Ooze. Aki and Nar. Yuto. That her father inhaled sharply was audible to her. In his daughter Hiyashi's cold voice, he lectured, "You should not associate with such a person more than is necessary. He is far beneath you. I hope you can remember that, my child. Furthermore, he is dangerous and unpredictable." Fearfully, Hinata said, because of the KY. Ubi, 2. San. His final words to her before turning left were, "So they told you about IT. You should know what to do. Remember to not disgrace our clan Hinata." Hinata had lost all of her hunger following her encounter with her father. She then marched directly to her room and began getting ready for the evening. Her positive attitude was already waning. Her self-esteem was already quite low, but Hiyashi Hyuga could always make it worse. Her father had to put her down once more. In addition, like the majority of the villagers, he detested her idol for a reason that Naruto had no control over. No matter how much she wanted to cry, she resisted the urge. Her day had gone really well up until that encounter with her father, and she refused to let him bring her down too much. There was nothing her father could do to prevent her from speaking and interacting with Naruto on a regular basis from now on. Hinata dozed off with those thoughts. Naruto had been back for 3 days. To better fit into his new team, he had been training every day with Hinata and Shino, primarily on trust and teamwork exercises. Despite the fact that they were both somewhat strange, he began to like them. After their daily training, 1 or 2 D-rank missions, he continued to reside in the woods around Training Ground 42 for the time being. To get food and other necessities from the village, the blonde had dispatched a few transformed clones every day. He had used this as a means of avoiding them because he simply couldn't stand their obnoxious looks after being gone for so long. He also visited Iruka Sensei on the first day and received a list of books that he ought to have read while in the academy. Since then, Naruto has sent a changed clone to the public library, where it reads 1 book every day and dispels in the evening. The blonde suffered from a headache for approximately 30 minutes after that. Kurenai Sensei had taught him the fundamentals of dispelling genjutsu, which he had nearly failed to replicate. His vast chakra reserves and lack of chakra control made him vulnerable to genjutsus. Additionally, his sensei had taught him that he would likely never be able to use any illusionary techniques at all because they required nearly as exacting control as medical jutsus. He wasn't particularly upset about that, though. He preferred sound arguments to gimmicks. He would be able to spar with his teammates for the first time today. Being able to compare his abilities to theirs thrilled Naruto. But he had no illusions. He would have to fight hard to hold his own against them without his explosions and his limited taijutsu skills. He would have to take on Hinata in his first battle. Shino and their sensei would observe the battle from the sidelines, while both stood on the other side of the clearing. Naruto was relaxed, his hands already forming his favorite hand sign, while his Hyuga opponent stood in her Juken stance. With a hint of glee, the black-haired Jonin said, "No clones, Naruto. I want to judge your combat abilities and yours alone. You can begin anytime you want." The young genin was nearly perspiring now because his clone had read a book about Konoha's clans yesterday and was now fully aware of the abilities of the Hyuga. Even though he was completely dead without clones, he refused to surrender without retaliating. Thus, he assumed his spontaneous position and bided his time until Hinata launched her attack. It would be suicide to move in first without his army's support. Meanwhile, the Hyuga girl, who had already activated her bloodline limit, eyed him closely. She was unsure of what to do because she didn't want to harm Naruto, who was now a prime target after Kurenai. Sensei banned him from using shadow clones. The blonde yelled across the clearing and gave her one of his signature smiles, saying, "Come on Hinata, show me how strong you are, no need to hold back, I can take quite a few hits." This kind of encouragement caused Hinata to charge in the direction of her enemy. A flurry of shuriken and kunai greeted her. The girl practically danced around the flying weapons, taking steps to the right and left. She launched her attack as soon as she was within range of the melee. Even though Naruto blocked the first few blows, they still closed some of the tenketsu points in his arms. He began to move more slowly, but she broke his defense. A few seconds later, his face was twisted in agony as he lay on the ground. Everyone was taken aback because Shino and Kurenai had never witnessed the girl fight with such vigor and skill. Because she had humiliated him in front of their fellows, Hinata feared that the blonde would now despise her, while Naruto was shocked at how easily he was defeated. Astonished, the downed genin began to sit up and gazed at the Hyuga girl. He gave her a thumbs up and exclaimed, "That was awesome Hinata," with excitement. A faint smile adorned the brunette's face as she blushed a deep shade of red and fainted with a "eep" at his unexpected compliment. Naruto became anxious. "I swear I didn't do anything this time, I didn't even touch her, Shino help me, come on." In the meantime, the Aburame approached Hinata to see how she was doing, despite knowing why she had blacked out. Kurenai could only smile at her team's interactions. She was certain that the blonde was ultimately advantageous to them. Even Shino appeared more animated, and Hinata had never been this forthcoming before. The Jonin were eager to see how the blonde mystery would transform them all, for better or worse. With the exception of one Hinata Hyuga's sporadic fainting episodes, the first week of the new Team 8 had gone by without any significant incidents. Every day at around 8 a.m., the three genin and their Jonin Sensei gathered at Training Ground 42, where they conducted their exercises until around 2 p.m. They typically finished 1 or 2 D-rank missions after a half-hour lunch break before ending the day. After the customary routine, Kurenai dismissed her team today and informed them that they would have tomorrow off to do as they please. 6 days a week, Konoha's ninja worked as usual, taking the 7th day off to rest. The Naidame Hokage, Tobarama Senju, developed this system over 50 years ago. Since it was put in place, the number of overworked ninjas had significantly dropped, demonstrating the schedule's value. In order to ensure that over 80% of the shinobi were available on any given day, a dedicated office assigned the days off to each individual or team. The system might be suspended in certain situations, such as during a war, in order to maximize the number of personnel available. Kurenai Yuhi was currently waiting to deliver the requested report on the newest member of Team 8 to her leader in the Sandaime Hokage's office. The old man's voice rose. "You can start with your assessment on Uzumaki Naruto, whenever you are ready, Kurenai. First the most important part of my analysis, for now there are no heavy indicators that he is a spy or sleeper agent of any foreign power. Although I will continue my surveillance for a while to be sure of my first impression, 5 days aren't enough to come to a final conclusion. Some of his behavior patterns seem to have changed over his extended absence. If you are ready Hokage Sama, I would now go into a more detailed report on my findings." The Jonin with black hair stopped here to let the news sink in. With a slight nod, Sarutobi allowed her to carry on with her review. "The current file on Naruto isn't really accurate anymore Hokage Sama. He is still hyperactive, although less than expected, easy excitable and a happy nature, but beneath that the boy appears to be more mature and smarter than his records would indicate. For example, on our first team meeting, Naruto insisted on telling his new comrades about his burden, claiming that they would sooner or later experience him using the demon's chakra, and if they didn't know about it, it could be an obstacle in battle." Hinata and Shino took the news fairly well, realizing that even though the boy has the Kyuubi sealed in him, he is nothing more than a human being with a heavy burden. Over the last few days, Naruto's lively nature loosened up both of his comrades. Hinata was always shy and had a problem with her confidence. Shino on the other hand, is mostly silent and observant, like all Aburame. The changes in them are currently small, but after spending more than 3 months with both, I could still notice them, Kurenai explained, pausing briefly to consider what she had said. The elderly leader remarked solemnly, "The boy always had the talent to brighten people, if only more would allow it." Sarutobi drew on his pipe and smoked. "Do you think they will be ready for the Chunin exam next month? My son and Kakashi already told me, they plan to enter their teams. There are only 4 weeks left, Hokage Sama. I will only support their participation if I know they are certainly ready." When they can complete a minimum of 3 C rank mission to my satisfaction and all of them have overcome the experience of their first kill, then I will likely enter them. The Jonin responded with an expression of sternness. The Sandaime was happy with her review and thought about it after talking with the Jonin. Sensei. Your reasoning is understandable. Those exams are quite deadly and we don't want to lose any hopeful genin. Teams 7 and 10 have more field experience than your 3 genin. Furthermore, Kakashi's team did really well since their recreation. Very likely, they are the best rookie team we have this year. Anything else I should know, Kurenai? Although she had promised the boy that she would not tell anyone, the black-haired woman wanted to inform the Hokage about Naruto's new living situation. The blonde currently resides in the woods around Training Ground 42. Kurenai disliked having to tell her superior a small white lie, but she had to maintain the teacher-student relationship or the blonde would likely never trust her again. The female determined that she could at least share Naruto's newfound love of explosions with the Hokage. There is one other thing that I think is worth to be mentioned. Naruto somehow was able to devise a way to detonate his shadow clones. A quite dangerous technique, even though it is still not fully mature. Also, he has taken an excessive liking to blow up things. Training Ground 42 has no green patches of grass anymore. The whole clearing consists of small craters, burnt grass or exposed earth. If this is not a problem, I would request that this training ground will be off limits for everyone besides my team. So we can contain Naruto's path of destruction on a single location. After giving the statement some thought, the Hokage nodded. Request approved. Please watch over him and control his new explosive vandalism, Kurenai. You're dismissed, if this was everything. The black-haired Jonin walked out of the Hokage's office with a little bow, leaving the old leader alone with the damned piles of papers and his thoughts. The fact that Training Ground 42 was located so far from Konoha was fortunate. Otherwise, the villagers would have been terrified by the sound of Naruto's explosions. The blonde had been training there all day. He worked on one of his ideas for a new jutsu after doing some chakra control exercises and letting about 30 of his clones blow up in an attempt to improve his detonation technique. For him, the final few days with his new team were enlightening. His experience on Team 7 was very different from Team 8. Sasuke and Sakura never felt totally at ease with him, but his new team appeared to accept him more readily. He then began mentally contrasting his old and new teams. The brooding Avenger, Sasuke never spoke to anyone more than was necessary and usually had a frown on his face. In certain aspects, the Uchiha was similar to Shino, but despite the Aburame's limited speech, he never gave Naruto the sense of inferiority that Sasuke typically enjoyed. Additionally, Shino was kind and helpful when he spoke up. Naruto couldn't really read the bug user's emotions, at least he thought so. Sakura and Hinata differed as much as day and night. In hindsight, it was occasionally difficult to understand why Naruto had always enjoyed the Pinkette. It wasn't that he didn't like her now, but he felt a chill go down his spine when he remembered how she had treated him. Hinata, on the other hand, was strange, but in a positive sense. Despite her strong stammering and occasional fainting if he approached her or for other reasons he didn't fully understand, she was a nice person despite her extreme shyness. She didn't hit or insult him. He probably had a chance of making friends with Shino and Hinata because, despite being informed about the Kyuubi that was sealed inside of him, they were actually quite kind and had even accepted him. He smiled slightly at the idea of one day referring to his teammates as friends. His mind strayed to another issue at hand. In the past few days, Naruto had discovered something fascinating. While eating lunch with his team, he became aware of it. He also enjoyed the fact that he was eating meals with his sensei and teammates every day, which was something new to him. During his time with them, he was never ejected from any restaurant. He could see that most of the time, the service staff didn't like him, frequently staring at him with hatred, but he was still served without too many issues. Following that encounter, he experimented with going into stores and eateries by himself. When he was still a student at the academy, he was not permitted to enter the same business. It produced a result that was comparable to what he had seen with his team. With little difficulty, he was now able to enter and utilize their services. He came to the conclusion that, as a genin, he could utilize all facilities and services, but he would still be subjected to insults and vile looks. For the time being, Naruto decided to use the transformation jutsu whenever he wasn't with his team in order to easily avoid their attacks. The blonde should have been used to the way most of the village treated him by now, but it was much more difficult to handle after he returned. Primarily because he never once had to deal with hostilities while traveling outside of Konoha. He now missed being a typical boy like everyone else. Naruto thought about his housing situation in light of this new information. He ought to be able to find an apartment or something comparable in the city as a genin, but was that really what he wanted? he would have to put up with all the verbal and mental abuse once more if he lived in Konoha. He currently avoided that quite well. He only used transformed clones or his team to enter Konoha. For the time being, he came to the conclusion that he was unsure of what to do and that he would need to reevaluate the entire matter at a later date. He would spend some more time out here in the woods before making up his mind. He had his sleeping bag and a tent, so it wasn't too bad out here. In addition, his team's training facility was right outside, and he could obtain anything he needed from his transformed clones. Naruto was so worn out at the end of his day off that he dozed off. The fact that the training grounds were far from Konoha was also advantageous because the blonde snored rather loudly, frightening practically every animal in the surrounding forest. Team 8 resumed their regular training regimen the following day. Until the blonde was able to withstand everything his sensei threw at him, Kurenai and Naruto practiced breaking out of genjutsus once more during the regular hour of the day. Shino and Hinata spared against one another during this hour. Until all three genin had received individual instruction, they would alternate, with their sensei assigning a personal 1-hour session to another of her students. The remaining 3 hours were devoted to team building exercises, tactics, and group maneuvers. Naruto had discovered during the regular sparring matches that Hinata was the most skilled taijutsu practitioner. If the bouts didn't go on for too long, she usually prevailed over both of her teammates. Otherwise, Shino would use his Kakaichu bugs to drain her chakra and Naruto could exhaust her with his shadow clones. Shino was at a disadvantage in his fights with the blonde, even though using his bugs to drain the chakra proved to be a tiresome process. The blonde had numbers on his side, but the Abarame's taijutsu was marginally superior to Naruto's. Those two always played well. Balanced, long matches that frequently ended in a draw. As Naruto raised his voice, Team 8 was prepared to begin the second portion of their daily routine, having already finished their 3-hour sparring program. Hey Hinata, I have a question about your fighting style, if that's okay for you. A timid response came from the bashful heiress. Sure, Nar.Yuto. K.Kun, what is it? Before he asked again, the blonde made a focused face. Is there some special reason why you usually don't use any ranged weapons? With your Byakugan's abilities, I thought you would be really good with throwing weapons and such stuff. The blonde boy's words of praise for Hinata and her bloodline caused her face to flush a little. She responded somewhat embarrassedly, fidgeting with her fingers. M.My clan is specialized in melee fighting, also my O.Own's skills with kunai and shuriken aren't that good. Hinata was even more uneasy after Naruto smiled encouragingly at her. The Jinchuriki put himself in a contemplative pose for a brief moment, recalling an incident that occurred in Wave Country. Even when your family are masters of martial arts, you shouldn't limit yourself to only one way of fighting. Then he began talking once more. Ever tried Senbon? You know, those pesky needles can be really dangerous, Ibeo. Kurenai had watched her students converse with one another. There were some merits to Naruto's suggestion, so it wouldn't hurt to see if the girl could make use of Senbon needles. The black-haired Jonin took roughly 10 needles out of one of her pouches and gave them to the Hyuga, saying, he might be right, Hinata, this is something you should try out. Watch me carefully, I will show you how to use them. Hinata was prepared to try the Senbon after about 5 minutes of instruction. Activating her bloodline, she fixed her gaze on a tree some 20 meters from where she was. She hurled the needle at the target using the throwing technique her sensei had demonstrated. The Senbon sank in about half a centimeter after striking the center of the tree trunk. The blue net threw the tiny metal spikes at her target one after the other. None of them missed, and eventually all 10 of them were embedded in the area around the first, no more than 15 centimeters away. Naruto shouted through the clearing, that was awesome. With great enthusiasm. I knew you could do it. Naruto wanted to pat the girl on the shoulder to encourage her, but he held back because he knew she struggled with shyness. The always stoic Aburame was praised, and you could almost see a tiny smile on his face as he said, excellent display of your abilities, Hinata. Kurenai's student was congratulated, saying, you seem to be a natural. That was very good, especially for a beginner. The Hyuga girl was so embarrassed to hear all of those compliments from her team that her face flushed. Nevertheless, Hinata Hyuga's discovery of her love for hurling tiny metal needles at her adversaries would always be remembered. Having to play the target for her studies, it was also the day her friends arrived to curse. With the exception of Hinata's new training regimen with her sharp metal spikes, Team 8's second week went pretty much as the first. The girl, who now carries around 200 of them, spent the majority of her private training sessions with Kurenai practicing throwing Senbon. However, during the third week, everything that is typically done should change. With a mission file in hand, their sensei entered training ground 42 at precisely 8 a.m. Shino was the first to ask, his otherwise monotonous voice tinged with curiosity. You have already acquired us a mission for today, Kurenai, sensei? Each genin received a sheet of paper with a brief explanation of their task from the black-haired Jonin. After all our training and the tedious chores you had to till now, I am sure you three will be able to handle this assignment without problems. This news appeared to excite Naruto, Hinata, and even Shino. Before Kiba was assigned to Team 7, the Hyuga and the Aburame had only completed one straightforward C rank, an escort mission. After 3 months of only receiving D ranks, both were more than delighted to do something different at last. Although he hadn't grumbled about the tasks his team had to complete, the blonde Jinchuriki couldn't disguise his excitement. Kurenai began talking once more. We're to investigate this activity and if possible stop the criminals behind them. Pack for roughly 2 weeks. Meet me at the main gates in 2 hours. An increase in robberies was reported in the vicinity of Tanzaku, a notorious gambling city in the Land of Fire, during the last month. Team 8 Sensei then disappeared in a cloud of smoke, leaving only floating leaves in their wake. Team 8 left for their first C-rank mission less than 2 hours later. Hopefully, they are prepared for the difficulties that lie ahead. After 3 uneventful days of travel, Kurenai and her team arrived in Tanzaku. Their sensei had given the 3 genin instructions to collect information from the locals while she spoke with the authorities. To learn as much as they could in the limited time, the genin had divided. Team 8 was reassembled an hour later. The black-haired woman who was facing the young ninjas asked, "Did you find out anything helpful?" With a hint of embarrassment in his voice, Naruto replied, "Not much, sensei. Only got some vague rumors, saying that the culprits hide in the woodlands to the south." He was unable to obtain more precise information in the short amount of time he had. The last attack occurred 2 days ago, on the road that leads towards the Land of Rivers. 4 travelers were robbed and killed, was the Aburame's response. It. Talked to a pair of hunters sensei, they saw a group of at least 7 men our king through the woods. Kurenai smiled kindly at her team. You 3 did well. It will be the best if we start with the latest crime scene. They arrived at the location of the most recent attack without much delay. A number of dark red and black spots marred the road ahead of them. Additionally, there were numerous scratches and other marks on the ground that suggested a fight had taken place there. The place was filled with the stench of the dead. It took a lot of self-control for the young Hyuga to keep all of her food inside because she had turned nearly white upon seeing this place and the overpowering stench. She was reassured by Kurenai, "You can stay back, if you want, Hinata. No need to see all of this." The Jonin could try to be lenient with the girl for the time being, but she knew that she would eventually have to get used to such sights. Naruto was studying the dried blood puddles in the meantime. Each of the 4 victims had one of them. Each of them had lost at least 3 liters of blood by the size of it. Even common thieves could kill more quickly and with less bloodshed, so whoever did this enjoyed his job far too much. Those robbers must have been truly repulsive people. Shino seemed to be the picture of composure. "Sensei, I think I found a trail. Why you ask?" "Because my Kakaichu have detected a faint trace of blood, leading to the south. He didn't show it if the blood and odor bothered him." With a hand signal, Kurenai said, "Good, we move on in diamond formation. Shino you lead, Hinata you take the right side, Naruto the left, and I am at the back. Hinata activate your Byakugan periodically to survey the surroundings and look out for possible dangers." The 3 genin began to make their way forward, following Shino's lead. Following the blood trail, the team traveled through a dense forest for several hours. Everyone stopped when Hinata abruptly raised her hand. She said in a barely audible whisper, "A small camp, about 100 meters in our current direction. 7 men, no ninja." Naruto took command and explained his strategy to the others. "Hinata, Shino give me cover with ranged attacks. I will attack with 10 to 15 clones and take them out. That should be the safest approach." "What do you say, sensei?" he said. It was a straightforward but sensible plan, and Kurenai considered it for a few seconds before nodding to the blonde. The group resumed their progress, gradually getting closer to their goals. 5 tents surrounded a small fire in a glade. Unaware of the impending assault, the bandits were chatting and drinking. Meanwhile, Team 8 members had taken up positions north of the camp. Shino and Hinata had scaled a tree and awaited Naruto's attack signal. Meanwhile, the Jinchuriki hid behind a tree and waited for the ideal opportunity to attack. At last, their sensei, concealed by a genjutsu, watched them all from a tree branch. The hail of iron started right away after the whiskered genin winked with his hand. Shino's shuriken tore through the air as Hinata began tossing senbon. 12 blonde copies showed up in the glade at the same moment. The bandit camp erupted as the first throwing weapons struck their targets. the men tried to hide behind their leather tents as shouts could be heard. Before he could conceal himself, one of them passed out, paralyzed, with over 20 needles protruding from his limbs and torso in different locations. In order to avoid unintentionally striking the blonde copies, Naruto's teammates halted their attack as all of his clones rushed towards the camp. The 12 clones soon surrounded the 6 thugs that remained. With an icy tone, one of the blondes said, "Give up and I don't have to kill you bastards, Dadbeo." The band's leader struck the copy with a large, bloody, one-handed axe, but the copy easily ducked the blow. The filthy thug yelled at the identical-looking Genins, "Shut up, brat. First we will skin you and then the rest of your team. I hope you all bled well." The original person yelled, "You know what to do." Upon hearing those words, every clone made a ram sign and began to focus their chakra. Without any delay, the bandits launched their counterattack, but it was too late. Before the explosions began, 3 clones were destroyed. The clearing was rocked by 5 explosions, and a large cloud of dirt was blown through it by the blast wave. Team 8 was able to witness the horrific scene once the dust had settled. Body parts and blood were everywhere. Not a single body was whole. The ground was covered in broken heads and torn limbs, and the smell of burning flesh was strong. Even the trees that surrounded the glade had been struck by some of the fleshy parts. Hinata rushed away, her face pale and tears streaming down her cheeks, as soon as she saw the massacre. It was inevitable that the Hyuga girl would throw up everything she had consumed today. Kurenai was taken aback. She hadn't anticipated the blonde's cruelty. Tearing the enemy to pieces would not have been the only method of subduing them. It worked, no doubt, but it was too harsh. She had witnessed a lot during the Third Shinobi World War, and the clearing undoubtedly brought back memories of the period when the elemental nations were at war. Following those thoughts, the black-haired Jonin tried to console the upset girl by pursuing her escaping student. Meanwhile, Shino could only gaze at his blonde teammate in awe. He killed 7 men in the most heinous ways imaginable without blinking an eye, and he seemed completely unaffected by it. Aburame, who was always stoic, was repulsed by what he saw. Meanwhile, Naruto was crossing the clearing on his way to the crater that his copies had made. In an attempt to determine whether anything valuable or significant remained, he combed through the remnants of his enemies and their camp. He went back to Shino's side after discovering nothing. They all remained silent until their sensei came back. A worried Kurenai, who had lost sight of her female charge, yelled, "Hinata!" She soon discovered the girl throwing up while leaning against a tree. In a straightforward effort to console the heiress, the Jonin placed a reassuring hand on the Hyuga's shoulder. Hinata finished emptying her bowels after a few minutes. She was still crying uncontrollably. She stumbled out, Hike. Killed them. The Kunoichi yelled in agony, He SL. Slaughtered them. Naruto. Slaughtered them all. The only thing Kurenai could do at this point was to embrace the girl. A rookie genin shouldn't witness this. After giving the hug back, Hinata was sobbing uncontrollably and clinging to her sensei. The girl eventually relaxed her hold and released Kurenai after they had been standing in each other's arms for some time. The Hyuga appeared to be in disarray, but she had stopped crying. Kurenai left the heiress alone after saying, "Hinata, wait here. I'll get the others. It's better if you don't have to see that again. I will be back soon." Hinata was lost in thought after crying and throwing up. Actually, she hadn't even realized her sensei was gone. Did she have Naruto-kun? Where had he gone? She had only dreamed of being on the same team, so she was glad he had come back. She now saw him nearly every day. Indeed, he had changed somewhat, but that was to be expected after all this time. She was now afraid of the blonde boy, though. How could the kind man she looked up to be so heartless and vicious in battle? Kurenai, Shino, and Naruto returned a few minutes later. No one had said anything when the black-haired Jonin discovered them standing close to the glade. She could see that even Shino was taken aback, but Naruto appeared calm, as if the entire situation had never happened to him. After burning the remains with a Kaden Jutsu, Kurenai led her 2 genin back to Hinata. When her blonde crush appeared, the brunette was unable to look at him. As she turned away, Naruto could see the fear in her eyes. It was the exact reaction he had expected. However, he was unable to postpone this event. He was now who he was, and they would either accept or despise him for it. Kurenai finally broke the silence between them by saying, "What did you do out there, Naruto? That wasn't necessary." The blonde retorted, "That's how I'm fighting. Did you 3 think the explosions were for show? Nobody of us got hurt. The mission is a full success. Well, I'm sorry that you had to see this massacre I made. But if I shall remain a part of this team, you must get accustomed to my way of fighting. Explosions are messy." Kurenai could understand her young charge's motivations. Even so, there was no need for your actions, we could have taken them down without ripping them apart, she said. Despite this, she was still able to support it. Ultimately, it was unnecessary. Naruto glared angrily at his sensei. The blonde asked without waiting for his sensei's response, "You read the report about the Wave Country mission, I assume? A so-called harmless mission got us nearly killed. I thought Sasuke was dead back then. There is no guarantee for anything." Naruto breathed deeply. The blonde turned around and began to slowly walk in Tanzaku's direction, saying, "I will do everything necessary to protect my comrades, those who are important to me. Because that is my Nindo, Tt Ibeo." Shino, Hinata, and even Kurenai were unable to do anything but gaze at Naruto. To keep them safe, he killed their enemies. Seeing his teammate almost die on his first C-rank mission and then traveling the world by himself must have been a difficult experience for someone that young, and his sensei was at a loss for words. It appeared that he would now take every precaution to make sure that such an incident never occurred again. The rest of Team 8 soon followed their blonde-haired teammate. They were all silent and absorbed in their thoughts about what had happened in the forest. When Team 8 eventually arrived at the outskirts of Tanzaku, dusk had already begun to fall. On the entire track back to the town, no one had said a word. Everyone else on Naruto's team was preoccupied with their own thoughts following his outburst, and the blonde himself wasn't in the mood for any discussions. His normally bright blue eyes appeared lifeless, and his face was twisted into a perpetual frown. Kurenai had determined that they needed to find a place to spend the night because it was already too late for them to begin their journey home to Konoha. Finding a good hotel for the night didn't take them long. While their sensei completed the necessary preparations, the three young ninja waited in the lobby. Naruto began to leave their lodging as soon as the Jonin gave each genin a room key. His worried sensei asked in a harsh tone, "Where do you think you are going, Naruto?" The blonde's voice was icy but laced with a secret rage as she said, blowing off some steam. As he gradually faded from view, his fellows could only gaze at his retreating back. The remnants of Team 8 were gathered in their sensei's hotel room 10 minutes later. Shino and Hinata had jumped at the chance Kurenai had given them to discuss what had transpired in the woods. Nobody knew how to strike up a conversation as the Jonin and her two genin sat in the room. After an awkward 5 minutes of silence, Hinata finally posed the first query. The Hyuga girl had considered the blonde's statement, but she was unable to completely comprehend why he believed that killing their enemies was the best way to keep his team safe. Sensei, why did N and Naruto K.Kun think it was necessary to kill them all? She asked. This is the main question here, Hinata, as our enemies were never a real threat to us. Also, I would like to know what happened on Naruto-san's mission to Wave Country. What sparks my interest in those events? Currently it seems that his experiences there are part of his reason for acting like he did. Yes, Shino. During their journey back to the city, the black-haired Jonin took a deep breath and thought about how she could explain Naruto's actions to her other two charges, even though she didn't fully understand him herself. The only thing I can tell you about the mission to Wave is what you already heard. Naruto thought that Sasuke was killed by their enemy. He probably blames himself for what happened. If you want to know more, you will have to ask him. It is not my place to speak more about those events. Hinata and Shino were let down because they had hoped to find out more about the blonde's intentions. Is there anything you see can tell us, sensei? After a brief pause, Kurenai said, I know Naruto cares about us. You heard his Nindo. He is willing to do everything to protect the people important to him, which seems to include us three. Their sensei said gravely, I hope you two can still work together with him, even after seeing him do something so gruesome. This unexpected question startled the young genin. Naruto had spoken to them about sticking with their team. However, they never imagined Kurenai would give his suggestion to leave them any thought. Sensei, Naruto-san is still our teammate. Even if Hinata and I are troubled by his brutal display, this is no reason to suspend him. Why, you may think? Because we should be able to sort out this problem between us in time. Shino said this with complete conviction. Though Hinata couldn't claim she wasn't impacted by their teammates' behavior, she still didn't want him to leave. Shino is right, Kurenai. Sensei. Please don't remove Naruto-kun from our team. The Hyuga girl was adamant that the blonde was not a bad person, even though she knew this in her heart. He must have had a valid reason for his actions. All she needed to do now was discover why. The Jonin with the black hair smiled reassuringly at them. Both of you are really mature already. I needed to know if you still can work together. For now Naruto will stay with us. You two should go to bed, meanwhile I will look for our favorite blonde troublemaker. Kurenai was standing in a wooden area on the edge of Tanzaku about 20 minutes later. Finding Naruto wasn't too difficult. Even for someone who wasn't a sensor type, it was difficult to ignore his powerful chakra signature. She wasn't prepared for what she discovered. She had assumed that the blonde would literally blow off his rage by causing chaos somewhere with some explosions. However, the Jonin discovered him sitting in the grass with his eyes closed, as if meditating. The blonde stood up from the floor and said in a monotone, "Wondered when you would come looking for me." Unlike when he had left them behind, he appeared composed and at ease. The Jonin could now see that the boy was holding roughly 10 stone marbles of varying sizes in one hand. "What were you doing out here, Naruto?" The Jinchuriki zipped up his robe after slipping the stones into one of his belt pouches. "Some chakra control exercise I learned while traveling. Really relaxing. So you were here to tell me that you kicked me from your team because of my dangerous behavior?" Kurenai let out a deep sigh. "I'm not happy about your actions, but you were right on some accounts. Nobody got hurt and you completed the mission. Furthermore, I had a talk with Shino and Hinata. Both still want you on the team. But you should explain yourself sooner or later. They want some answers. The same goes for me. One more thing, you won't be using your explosions without my approval on missions, understood?" Though this was far better than Naruto had anticipated, he was ready for the worst. The blonde took a deep breath and said, "I understand. Please give me a few days. Speaking about my motivations is hard for me." Kurenai still had another question she wanted to ask the blonde, so she said, "You have 1 week, then I want a good explanation. Those bandits weren't your first kills? You were much too unaffected by their demise." "You were right, sensei. My first kill probably was in the battle on the bridge, not that I remember anything about that, it was too hectic. The first one I can recall was about 1 month later. Some bounty hunters ambushed me, must have thought I was a missing nin. It wasn't the whole story but it was close." Flashback when Naruto and Deidara nearly crossed the land of frost. The vast tundra gradually gave way to a thick coniferous forest. The blondes would reach the land of hot water in 2 more days. The bomber spoke in a low voice. The young genin's response was merely a slight hand gesture, indicating that he understood the situation. "We are being followed. Be ready for battle, Naruto." With his hands casually tucked into his auburn robe pockets, Deidara began to eat some of his unique clay with his tongues. But a shout broke the stillness before the missing nin could raise his hands again to attack. A rough voice yelled from behind the 2 blondes, "Let your hands where they are, don't want to get caught in one of your explosions, Deidara of Iwa." In an instant, Naruto and his mentor turned around, and the genin automatically assumed his taijutsu stance, appearing a little uneasy about what was happening. Deidara, on the other hand, was very at ease, keeping both hands in his pockets. The blonde Jinchuriki yelled at the group of dirty, disheveled mina roughly 15 of Tama who appeared to be common bandits or waylayers. "We don't have anything of value, so just go away, Tt Ibeo." A man with a ruffled beard and black hair burst out laughing. He gestured to Deidara and said, "Oh, kid, we are not robbers, we are here for the big fish." At the end of his speech, the leader laughed even more. "Today is just our lucky day. Iwa pays 20 million ryo for this bastard. I doubt we can get any bounty for you, buddy, but probably somebody would buy you as slave, you never know that." The former Iwa ninja took his hands out of his pockets and threw them toward their enemies, asking, "What gives you the impression you can win against us, Hundreds of tiny flying insects were released as the hand mouths opened. The 2 blondes and the group of bounty hunters were separated by a swarm of clay creatures that looked vaguely like giant flies. Naruto used Shadow Clone Jutsu to create 5 sturdy clones, which instantly positioned themselves in front of him and his mentor. With a kunai in each hand, the copies faced their adversaries. A smiling Deidara asked, "Don't want to reconsider your plans, The bearded man yelled, "Get them." The group of bounty hunters was not at all intimidated by the 2 ninjas' displays. 3 grenades were thrown and smoke filled the battlefield as soon as he finished speaking. As the smoke surrounded them, both blondes began to cough. It was difficult to breathe in the gray haze, which burned in the eyes and lungs. Deidara felt that whatever gas it was having a negative effect on him, so he grabbed his young apprentice and attempted to escape the smoke cloud. He felt weaker, more exposed, every second that went by. When the missing nin finally emerged from the gas cloud, he stumbled and fell to the ground, dropping Naruto on the hard forest floor without any fanfare. Naruto asked in a slightly agitated tone, "Hey sensei, what was that for?" However, he received no response, as the blonde bomber was coughing violently. The fume had made it difficult for the young genin to breathe, but it seemed to affect Deidara far more than it did him. He was concerned about his mentor. Naruto was startled out of his reverie by the realization that his clones had been destroyed. He needed to prepare for battle in order to protect his sensei. The bearded man said, "You are still ready to fight, brat?" as he emerged from the smoke cloud, his men trailing closely behind him. On the other hand, Naruto growled back, "What did you do to him?" His men advanced toward the two blondes with a single, swift hand gesture. "The gas you mean? It disrupts one's chakra for a few minutes, quite effective on higher level ninjas. Strange that it didn't work on you, probably you were just too weak." Naruto felt angry because he was the only one who could stop those jerks from hurting Deidara. Before settling on a deeper shade of blue than usual, the boy's eyes briefly flashed between a dark red and their typical blue. Naruto shouted, "Multiple shadow clone jutsu," while making a cross. Hand sign. 40 copies of the blonde genin appeared in a flash. 2 of them quickly seized the fallen Deidara and fled, the others scowling at the assailants. This time, Naruto wasn't going to take any chances and followed his mentor's 2 clones. His imitators were aware of what to do. If one of his important people were harmed, there would be no forgiveness. The bounty hunters were surrounded by the copies, who all made the ram hand sign before closing their eyes. A moment later, the forest was rocked by a loud rumble, and the ground trembled a little. Naruto was aware of what had transpired because he had witnessed it from 38 different angles. The mere thought of how ruthlessly he had destroyed those bastards and reduced them to minuscule fragments of flesh and blood sickened him. After 15 minutes, Deidara was fully awake once more. He asked, "What happened first?" Naruto's voice sounded dejected and he stumbled a little when he said, I killed them all." "Your first time, I presume?" the bomber asked, receiving a slight nod from the boy before continuing. "Won't sugarcoat it for you, we are shinobi, we kill, simple as that, Often it's them or you, doubt you want to die already? And not always the people you kill are the bad guys, sometimes you are the bad guy or nobody is it. If you can't take those facts, you should quit being a ninja. Those are the hard truths of the shinobi life." Deidara then left Naruto on his own to reflect on his feelings. Naruto suffered from nightmares for 5 days, but he eventually realized that Deidara was correct. He had to give up his long-held dream of becoming a ninja, or he had to learn to cope with the guilt. Kai flashback. "It's not like I enjoy killing, but I have come to terms with it. We are shinobi and shinobi are killers, that is something all of us have to accept. It's as simple as that." Naruto sighed. The blonde talked so casually about killing that the Jonin needed to know, "How much blood do you have on your hands already, Naruto?" The Jinchuriki must have already claimed a number of lives after everything she had seen that day. Naruto responded, "Far too much." His sensei could hear the boy's intense sadness in his voice. "If this was everything, Kurenai. Sensei, I am going to sleep now." The female Jonin considered the blonde boy's remarks as Naruto made his way to their hotel. She hadn't anticipated a rookie genin's perspective on the shinobi life. Although only seasoned chunin or jonin typically spoke in such a manner, there was a lot of truth to what he said. Early the following morning, Team 8 was once again en route home, making rapid progress in the direction of Konoha. Although to a much lesser extent, the tension that existed yesterday was still evident in the atmosphere. Overnight, everyone seemed to have calmed down a little. They arrived at the village hidden in the leaves by nightfall after 2 uneventful days of travel. It was the day following their return from Team 8's first C rank. For them, today was the last day of the week because tomorrow was their day off. Kurenai arrived at the Hokage Tower this morning with her mission report before making her way to Training Ground 42. The team needed some quiet routine after what had happened, so she had nothing special planned for today, just a typical 6-hour training session and a D rank afterward. Naruto had just finished another hour of breaking out of genjutsus, and he was gradually beginning to understand. He was no longer troubled by the simplest illusions, but he was literally lost the moment he became enmeshed in something more significant. Since Kurenai was Konoha's genjutsu mistress, she was certain that she would fix that. She would ensure that Naruto could escape from practically everything, even if he was unable to use her cherished artwork. All 4 ninja were interrupted from their current task when a black-clad ninja suddenly appeared in the clearing. The shinobi disappeared as quickly as he had appeared after saying, "Uzumaki Naruto, Hokage. Sama has requested your presence, immediately." Naruto complained. He then began to walk towards Konoha to meet his demise, and his team followed him. "The old man probably read your report, sensei." Kurenai, Hinata, and Shino were forced to wait outside as the blonde genin entered the Hokage's office 20 minutes later. Naruto made a sarcastic joke, saying, "Good day, Hokage. Sama. Already read of my newest accomplishments?" Finding the right words to explain his actions to his team was already a difficult task. He now had to defend his ruthless killing of those bandits in front of the village chief. With a frown on his face and his smoking pipe in his left hand while his other hand was clenched into a fist, the Sandaime responded, "This is a serious matter. You killed 7 men in cold blood. This isn't like you, Naruto. The blonde gave a gloomy laugh. Naruto sighed. He didn't want to have this conversation. You don't know me, old man, not anymore. The boy's cold eyes met the Hokage's to bolster his claim that the wave mission and more than 2 months on the road changed me, hardened me if you want call it that. I will do whatever is necessary to protect my teammates. Nobody will hurt them. Sarutobi would have liked to know more about this, but the boy would not respond. I understand. Naruto had a fair amount of mistrust for the Hokage ever since he returned because the elderly man had concealed his Uzumaki ancestry from him. There is still another matter at hand. I found out about your living arrangements. Care to explain? In a matter of seconds, Naruto's day had gotten worse. He yelled at the elderly leader, who told you that he could no longer be so certain after the recent events if Kurenai had betrayed him and broken her word. With some rage in his voice, the Hokage went on, a patrol of Chunin stumbled upon your camp about a week ago. I only got the report after you had left. So why are you living in the woods? Naruto nearly spat out the last sentence before turning around and leaving the office, leaving a shocked Hiruzen Sarutobi in his wake. My flat was already occupied by someone else when I came back. First I thought about getting a new one. But it's too hard for me to stay in the village, with the constant hate and prejudge I get. For now I live in the forest. It soothes me. And no, I don't need your help, Hokage. Sama, I will deal with my problems alone. As Naruto emerged from the Hokage's office, his sensei and teammates noticed a severe frown on the boy's face. The boy's mood was not at all lifted by whatever he and their leader had discussed. The blonde tapped his foot on the floor and gazed at the three in front of him without emotion. You could hear his frustration as he asked, "Can we get back to training?" Naruto began to walk towards their training ground after his sensei gave him the all clear, with the rest of his squad following closely behind. Team 8 ran straight into Sakura, Kiba, and Sasuke as they emerged from the tower. Indeed, Naruto nearly collided with the Uchiha boy head on. After dealing with the Hokage, the blonde was not in the mood to talk to his former teammates, so he muttered a sorry and wanted to go on his way. The dark-haired boy smirked as he said, "Whatever, Dobi, so you really survived. Fortune favors fools, after all." After turning around, the Jinchuriki gave the Uchiha a fierce look. "Teme, shove it." Naruto then attempted to leave once more before being startled by a jerk on his shoulder. Almost screaming, the pink-haired girl who had grabbed the blonde said, "You can't speak like that to Sasuke-kun." With the little white dog perched atop his head, the boy said, "Sakura is right. Is that your way to greet your former teammates?" Sasuke spoke up once more before the agitated Naruto could respond. "Kiba, Sakura, I don't need your help to deal with the Dobi. It's not like a no-name, like him could lay a finger on me." The blonde genin was on the verge of blowing up by now. He certainly did not benefit from the events of today. Naruto said, "Sasuke, would you like to see my newest jutsu, firsthand?" In an overly polite manner, but the anger that was bubbling inside his eyes was evident. The scene that played out in front of them left the rest of Team 8 speechless. Did the former members of Team 7 behave in this manner? Kurenai seized her blonde charge and departed right away before the situation could get any worse. Hinata and Shino trailed closely behind. All Sasuke, Sakura, and Kiba could do was gaze at Team 8's retreating rear. Hitaki Kakashi emerged in a whirl of leaves 5 seconds later. "Sorry, I am late, but I run into this woman and... Did I miss something?" After dragging the enraged Naruto all the way to training ground 42, Kurenai abruptly dropped him on the ripped ground. The Jonin asked in a cool, collected tone that did not reveal his anger at his behavior, "Care to explain why you wanted to show Sasuke Uchiha your explosions?" Naruto's prompt response was, "Hey, he started it, always badmouthing me, Datbeo." That is still no reason to threaten his life. You know you can't fight other Leaf Ninja, even if they agitate you, was Kurenai's firm reply. "Naruto, you can always talk to us, we're your team. So what really troubles you?" To calm himself, the blonde inhaled deeply. In a quiet, regretful tone, Naruto replied, "With your ultimatum, the old man snooping around in my affairs and then to me's insults, I just lost control, sorry." He then shrugged. "Probably it's the best I just get over with the needed talk. If it's okay with you I will try to explain my actions on our last mission, sensei." Kurenai smiled encouragingly at him. "It's good that you are ready to talk to us, start whenever you feel ready." Naruto said gravely, "Then you should sit down, this can take a while." The blonde spent the next 30 minutes detailing every event from his first C-rank mission. Beginning with the Demon Brothers' ambush, his promise to never give up again, his run.in with Zabuza, his first encounter with Haku in the woods, and the bridge's eventual conclusion. He was too weak, so it seemed that Sasuke had scarified his life for him. How he defeated the Hunter Nin, who was actually a disguised Haku, using the Kyuubi's power for the first time. The terrible tale of his adversary's life and how Haku had saved Zabuza from Kakashi Sensei's last assault. Finally, the reason for his 2-month disappearance. Then he came to a halt. Naruto's story nearly enthralled his team. It was a huge, perilous, and even depressing adventure for his first mission outside of Konoha. After the lengthy explanation, Kurenai asked, "Still, I don't understand fully how this leads to your Nindo and why you think you have to exterminate all dangers that could affect your teammates." Naruto sighed. That was what he had anticipated. He took a deep breath and said, "You probably can't understand my motivations." His eyes were sad and lifeless. A single tear trickled down Naruto's cheek as he clenched his fists tightly, causing tiny drops of blood to fall out. "I never had any friends or family. There are probably around 5 people who have my full trust. Sasuke and I weren't really close, but he probably could have become my first friend. Seeing him die, because I was unable to do something. Arg. It was horrible, knowing that it was my fault. As long as I am breathing, I will do everything to prevent something like that from ever happening again." Naruto yelled the final phrase. The rest of his team finally realized that was the point. The blonde only had a few bonds, and he was prepared to go to any lengths to keep the few people who were even somewhat close to him safe. Hinata said, "N. Naruto. K.Kun, if you want IW. Will be your F. Friend." Her voice was full of conviction. She could somewhat identify with her crush because she, too, experienced loneliness as a child, but at least she had a family, albeit not the most loving. She was unable to comprehend what it was like to be completely alone in the world. Shino could identify with Naruto in a similar way to Hinata. Because the Aburame had insects inside their bodies, most people outside of his family found them repulsive. Thus, his clan had been his only friends. Hinata is right. I would enjoy to be your friend Naruto, if that is desirable for you. Why, you may ask? Because you are my teammate and we should support each other in every way possible. Naruto was shocked because he hadn't anticipated anything like that. Really? You both mean it? He asked. Following Hinata's timid nod and Shino's affirmative response, Naruto embraced both of them and repeatedly yelled, "Thank you," across the clearing. That is, until he noticed that Hinata had passed out in his arms. He had not yet gone into full panic. Kurenai was limited to grinning. Her team's division had been healed, and the 3 genin were developing a close friendship. You could never know, so it's likely that they were destined for great things. Naruto felt fantastic today. Although he had a difficult day yesterday, everything worked out beautifully in the end. It wasn't like he truly detested the old man. He first had his disagreements with the Hokage. The blonde had many pleasant memories of the elderly leader, but he was still quite upset that the old man had kept his clan's existence a secret from him after finding out that the Hokage was aware of it. Naruto was confident that his feelings would eventually fade, but for now, all he wanted was for Sarutobi to stay out of his affairs. The blonde had just had the misfortune of nearly colliding with the stuck-up Uchiha Teme after the mess with the Hokage. During their brief argument, the Jinchuriki, who was already in a tense state, had to threaten the black-haired boy in order to give him a first-hand look at his loved one's explosions. Although Naruto had no intention of killing or even hurting Sasuke, he needed to let out his pent-up anger, and the Uchiha was the ideal outlet. The blonde was relieved that Kurenai Sensei had intervened to prevent him from doing something he would later regret. Ultimately, it turned out to be one of Naruto's most unforgettable days. Both of his teammates were eager to reassure him that they would be his friends after hearing his long explanation, and the blonde gladly accepted their offer. Just thinking about Shino and Hinata, his first 2 friends, made him happy. He had Deidara, Iruka, Tuchi, Ayame, Konohamaru, and even the elderly Hokage, so it wasn't like he had no one. All of those individuals were relatively close to Naruto. That was a huge improvement for him, even though he had friends in his own age group. After their sincere declaration of friendship, the 3 genin of Team Kurenai had only engaged in group training before their sensei fired them, and Naruto was still a little sore from yesterday. In an attempt to learn the throwing technique the black-haired Jonin had demonstrated to her, Hinata had used him and Shino as pincushions. The Hyuga girl became very skilled at launching several senbon with a single hand flick by the end of the day. Since it was Team 8's day off, he was free to do as he pleased, which usually meant training and eating a ton of ramen. It was already 9:30 after the blonde had slept in later than usual and finished his morning routine. It didn't sound good to spend another few hours trying to finish the first level of the Tower of Stone, but at least he could now do some more chakra control exercises. The blonde also wanted to finish this new jutsu, but that could wait until later. He still hadn't found that damned book about sealing, and he had other thoughts that required his immediate attention. One of his changed clones had asked the old librarian if the library had any books on the sealing arts 3 weeks ago, when he had finally made it back to Konoha. The man had assured him that there was, in fact, one book with the information he was looking for after looking through the inventory list, but he was unable to provide the location. And since none of Naruto's shadow clones had been able to find it up until this point, it was time for him to handle things himself. If you're wondering why the Konoha library only had one book on the sealing arts, the answer is very straightforward. In actuality, Konoha has 2 distinct libraries, the shinobi version for experienced ninjas and the public one for everyone. The issue at hand was that only ninja with at least Chunin rank could use the shinobi library. Even the rank of Jonin was necessary for some of the more significant sections. The blonde was, of course, limited to the civilian version for the time being. At least this one had a book that contained the information he required. Naruto was aware that he could most likely find a book about sealing elsewhere. However, the librarian informed him that this particular book was authored by a master sealer, and the blonde now desired that book rather than another. His choice for today was simple. He would spend the majority of his free time in the library looking for this undiscovered treasure. After about 7 hours, Naruto was furious and yelling. At this point, he had at least twice, if not more, gone through every book in that damned library. 5 transformed shadow clones had been used to aid him in the search, but to no avail. He must have done something suspicious if someone had seen him and his copies. Going through the library several times and turning around each book, it was obvious that something wasn't right. In the rear of the building, the Jinchuriki was propped up against a bookcase. He reasoned that he would likely have a better chance of finding what he was looking for in this less visited area of the library. He repeatedly slammed his clenched fist against the wooden shelf out of rage until he was struck in the head by something. Ouch! Naruto rubbed his head while gazing at the object that had struck his skull. There was a rectangular black object on the floor in front of him, but he wasn't entirely sure what it was. In order to get a better look at it, the boy's hand reached out and picked it up. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, which Naruto removed with the sleeve of his robe. Following that process, he was able to determine that it was a book. What else might have fallen from a bookcase? Then, the title, Sealing, the Under Appreciated Art, Volume 1, was then read by the blonde. Surely that couldn't be correct. Naruto finally understood after reading the title 5 times. He had discovered the gem he was looking for by pure happenstance. Yeah, was his triumphant shout, reverberating throughout the entire structure. A few seconds later, the elderly librarian was standing in front of him, wearing a furious expression. This is a library, if you do that again, you will be thrown out. I found it, I finally found it, Datbeo. The blonde's exuberance was now unabated by anything, not even an irate elderly man scolding him. The boy had even forgotten that he was still changing and that everyone who heard him say, Datbeo, thought he sounded weird. You have found what? The impatient caregiver asked. The book was thrust almost into Naruto's face. The book about sealing, can I lend it out? The boy held a small, worn black book, which the librarian took away. He read the first page and looked at it for a few seconds before returning it. The young genin nodded eagerly when he asked, You want to lend out that? Before he went on. Take it, you're the first one that wanted to have it, since we have it here, it's yours now. Naruto would have performed a joyful dance, but he was certain that the librarian would yell at him if he did so again. The blonde was in front of his favorite ramen stand 15 minutes later. After all, he had to celebrate finding the book, and the old geezer even gave it to him for free. He entered the stand with a growl in his stomach because he hadn't eaten since breakfast and dinner was almost ready. Naruto nearly yelled, double my usual, Tucci, as he sat down. The newcomer was closely observed by the ramen chef, and you are? The irritated response was, I'm Naruto, TT Ibeo, who else? A perplexed Tucci replied, that's not even funny. Looked in the mirror recently, boy? When the blonde looked at himself, he finally got it. He continued to be changed into a random nobody. After a cloud of smoke, a blonde boy wearing his typical auburn robe took the place of the stranger. The chef said this as soon as he saw his favorite client, 4 miso ramen, coming up. Before long, the blonde was consuming his priceless ramen. Perhaps the better term to describe his table manners or lack thereof would have been devouring. Another patron came in and took a seat next to the Jinchuriki. The newcomer's voice said, 1 bowl of pork, please. The blonde was too busy eating to pay attention to him at the moment. After finishing his bowls of ramen, Naruto placed some cash on the counter and prepared to leave, but as he looked over at the other patron, he recognized the man right away and said, Hey, Kakashi. Sensei, long time no see. Turning his head, the one-eyed Jonin gazed at the speaker. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. He patted the blonde on his back and his eyes gleamed at the boy, saying, Naruto, should have suspected you were here too. Although I didn't recognize you without your usual omnipresent orange. I'm glad you're alive. Was really worried about you. We all thought you died back there. I'm sorry, I wasn't there to save you, said Kakashi with regret. With a knowing nod, the Jonin said, not your fault sensei, was too reckless back then. The old man told you about my little journey. Sorry for what happened yesterday, didn't want to go so over the top. The boy received a perplexed response like, what do you mean, Naruto, did something happen? My team meet your team as we left the Hokage tower and I got into an argument with Sasuke, nearly got out of hand if it weren't for Kurenai. Sensei, said the Jinchuriki with regret. Kakashi merely chuckled, having at last realized the peculiar circumstance he had encountered the day before. Hey, I know how you two are, always teasing each other and you always had a bit of a short temper. Some things never change. A short pause later the Jonin spoke seriously. You know, if you need something you can always come to me, I will always be your sensei. Grinning at the Jonin, the blonde said, thank you Kakashi. Sensei, I will remember that. Naruto waved Tucci and Kakashi off as he walked out of the ramen stand, saying, sorry, but I have to go, still things to do and places to be, you know. The following day, Kurenai Sensei was already over 25 minutes late, and Shino, Hinata, and Naruto were waiting in the training ground 42 clearing. While a certain lazy Nara had to sneeze hard somewhere else in Konoha, the blonde Genin joked, I hope Kurenai Sensei didn't catch the chronic lateness disease from Kakashi. Sensei. That would be so troublesome. In his typically stoic manner, the young Aburame asked, do you really believe that Naruto, because I think that such an illness doesn't exist. At the bug user's response, Naruto shook his head and said, geez, that was a joke Shino, you need to loosen up, man. Suddenly, there was a huge smoke explosion in front of the three Genin. A woman with purple hair emerged from the white fog and smiled at the Team 8. With a loud, intimidating voice, she said, Anko Mitarashi, Special Jonin and Interrogation Specialist, your new surrogate sensei for today and you three brats are Kurenai Chan's team? As she closely examined the three ninjas in front of her. Naruto yelled back at the newcomer, you're late. Where the hell is our real sensei and what is a special Jonin? You don't look so special lady, you know. Anko sighed before continuing, somewhat irritated, you're the Uzumaki loudmouth, I heard about, aren't you? I'm not impressed, I must say. The special Jonin muttered, barely audible, Kurenai is at the academy. They needed our Jonin showing of or something. Told them I could do that, but no, I wouldn't be a good influence on the children. The three children gazed at their temporary sensei, Naruto, with wide eyes and barely concealed rage. She had, after all, made fun of him. Was this weird individual actually their instructor for the day? They would not survive this. A fearful Hinata asked, Sensei, what are we doing today T? Then. The purple-haired lady grinned, but it was more of a menacing, savage grin. First some survival training, later on I have a special mission for you three. Naruto let out a moan. Really survival exercises? That sucks, TT Ibeo. Anko chuckled. She bit her thumb and drew blood, then slammed her hand to the floor, saying, yes, it will suck, at least for you three. For me? This will be quite entertaining. Summoning jutsu. A cloud of white smoke revealed a brown snake 10 meters long. As she spoke again, the special Jonin's smirk remained intact. The snake charged forward as she said, now try to survive that, brats. The three Genin spread out right away. To divert the serpent's attention, they split up and moved in three different directions. It didn't help that the snake was pursuing Naruto while ignoring the other two targets. The blonde boy was only a few centimeters away from the brown reptile when it lunged after him. Naruto thought he felt the beast's hot breath against his neck. The distraught Genin yelled, Hinata, Shino, I could use some help here, please. Through the clearing, a laughing Anko yelled, don't leave the training ground by the way. Or you get another hour with my little scaly friend. As soon as she heard her crush's plea, the Hyuga girl halted her retreat. Then she began to pelt the serpent with those spiked needles after pulling a bunch of senbon from one of her pouches. To her dismay, however, the metal spikes bounced off the reptile's scales without harming it and fell to the ground. In the meantime, Shino had also stopped his flight to assist Naruto. The bug user targeted the creature's head, which was its most vulnerable part, with a swarm of his Kakaichu bugs. The snake stopped pursuing Naruto and began to trash in its current location as soon as the insects began attacking its eyes. Now that he was out of danger, the blonde was prepared to launch a counterattack. Multiple shadow clone jutsu. 13 Narutos appeared, all of them beaming maniacally. The original exclaimed, "Surround the scaled bastard. Let us make some snake sushi." However, a shower of shuriken destroyed all the clones before they could even advance. The purple-haired special Jonin, who was still grinning, stood 10 meters away from the Jinchuriki and said, "Not so fast, Blondie. Who said you can attack and harm my little pet?" She slammed her hand down on the floor once more. Summing jutsu produced two smaller, bluer snakes that were roughly 5 meters long. Shino's insects had to flee or risk being burned to crisp after Anko leapt on the brown snake's head and a few minor fire explosions. Team 8 had literally completed their survival training after 2 hours of torture. After escaping from the two blue snakes for so long, Hinata and Shino were both sitting on the ripped ground, gasping for air. Meanwhile, Naruto appeared to be in worse shape. In addition to having bloodstains on his face, his robe was filthy and had holes in it. As the blonde boy attempted to dodge the large serpent's sharp teeth, Anko had decided it would be amusing to hurl a sharp kunai at him. Before he too fell to the ground, a weary Naruto said, "Can we please do the mission now, crazy snake? Sensei?" Only a folder was removed from the special Jonin's trenchcoat and thrown at their feet. All three genin began to nod frantically in spite of their fatigue. "This is your mission. If you don't complete it, I will find you and we will have some more quality time together. I think you understand?" Then Anko disappeared from their view in a whirl of leaves, a murderous smile of anticipation on her lips as she did so. "Ibiki needs me for some funny interrogation work at the T&I headquarters, so I have to leave you alone, behave or else." Naruto was now certain of one thing. He would rather endure one of Deidara's rambling, unintelligible art lectures than spend another hour with the crazy snake lady. Flashback: it was the day following his initial encounter with Deidara. Oh, how wrong Naruto was to think that learning how to blow things up would be awesome. The bomber informed him that before he could teach him anything, he needed to ensure that the blonde genin comprehended the principles and the actual beauty of his art. Only then could he join him as a fellow artist of destruction. Although he was still unable to fully understand what his new sensei was talking about, Naruto probably enjoyed explosions a lot. The blonde's earliest hours were the longest that followed. Art is an explosion and art is a blast. This are the ground rules, but there is so much hidden wisdom in it. Listen well, my pupil, and you will come to see the light. You have to pour your whole soul into your creations, only then they will reach the peak of true artistic greatness. Otherwise, fine art is the beauty of that single fleeting moment of explosion. Your art shall only live for that moment. Only in that split second you can experience the true beauty from within, the pureness of life and death. Naruto was only able to nod absently here and there during the many hours of explanations. When Deidara finally came to an end, the genin sighed. After concluding his speech, the former Iwanin asked, "You didn't understand anything, did you, Naruto?" The Jinchuriki displayed his typical enthusiasm by pumping his fist into the air and saying, "Sorry sensei, I will try harder next time, I promise, Datbayo." Kai flashback: Hinata rested for about 15 minutes before picking up and opening the mission folder. She was shocked by what she discovered. Just 3 lines of writing on a single sheet of paper. She gazed at the piece of paper, wondering if it was their surrogate sensei's sick joke or a mission file. However, it had to be authentic because it had the Hokage's official stamp on it. An irritated Naruto whimpered, "Come on Hinata, tell us about the mission. I would like to be done with another of these stupid chores." Both male genin looked at the girl in surprise after she said, It's a C rank, N Naruto.kun. She then gave the paper to Shino, saying, Inspection duty and an A. Address in Konoha's Merchant D. District. That is all it says. The Aburame took a few moments to look over the file. Highly unusual. Why? Because normally 3 genin aren't allowed to do C-rank missions without supervision from a higher-ranking ninja. Naruto later received the mission file from the bug user. Before he spoke, the blonde carefully read the document. The boy hurried away with his 2 teammates after saying, "Seems legit. Come on, we should get going. I don't need another hour with the crazy snake." Sensei. They were all very keen to avoid having to dodge a huge, ravenous serpent once more. The location of their mission, which turned out to be a warehouse, was quickly discovered. The 3 were met by a chunin as soon as they had found their target. The man led the 3 rookies into the building and said, "Finally your squad is here. Come inside, the work is already waiting for you." It's good that they found a replacement team so fast. Before arriving at a tiny office, Team 8 trailed the Chunin through the warehouse, past rows of boxes, packages, and shelves. There, he handed a clipboard containing a list to each genin. You three are new here, so I will explain your duties for today. This building is one of 3 shipping hubs in Konoha. Everything that is sent into the city will be controlled here for abnormalities. Hinata was pointed at by the man. He moved his hand and now pointed to Shino, saying, you will use your Byakugan to scan the new deliveries for anything unusual, like vermin or sabotage. Your bugs should be able to detect most kinds of poison or other harmful contents in our food shipments. And lastly you. He then turned to Naruto. The man paused and said, you have no useful Kekai Genkai, so you will just do normal logistic work. The clipboards I gave you contain the whereabouts of your workload and other information you need. Once you've finished with everything, you bring back the lists to me. I will pay you your share and then you can go home. Team 8 worked hard in the warehouse for the next few hours, and by the end of the day, all 3 of them were very worn out. Hinata's eyes were painfully strained and the majority of her chakra was depleted from the prolonged use of her bloodline limit. The same could be said for Shino, whose reserves were now quite low due to his extensive use of the Kakaichu bugs. On the other hand, Naruto was simply exhausted from spending the majority of the day carrying bulky boxes. Compared to what they typically received for their basic D-rank missions, the payment was at least significantly better. All 3, however, were certain that Anko Sensei was an oppressor of some sort who had taken pleasure in their misery. As was their custom, Team 8 was once more waiting for their sensei to arrive in the clearing of Training Ground 42 just a few minutes before the clock struck 8 in the morning. His teammates had already given him a few looks and weren't convinced that the Uzumaki would read something on his own initiative, so Naruto's attention was fixed on his new book. Hinata was quite perplexed by the subject and even used her Byakugan to look at the book's title and contents. Was something as intricate as the sealing arts truly of interest to the blonde boy? Kurenai said, good morning, had a good day yesterday with your surrogate sensei? As she made her way into the arena. Instantly, Naruto leapt, scowled at the Jonin with the black hair, and gestured accusingly at her. You tried to kill us. The snake lady is crazy, crazy I say. Their sensei attempted to act uninformed, even though she was aware that the special Jonin could be extremely taxing. Anko isn't that bad, you are surely exaggerating. It was evident that the blonde was upset. Not that bad? She hunted us down with her snakes for 2 hours, survival training my ass. At least the mission wasn't halfway bad and we were paid quite well. Silently observing the exchange, Shino and Hinata had grown accustomed to Naruto's demeanor by this point. Even Shino almost grinned at the blonde's antics, and the Hyuga girl had to control some giggles. In the meantime, the black-haired Jonin reflected that she needed to discuss how to treat her genin with the snake summoner because she needed them to survive. You did good on your second C rank. Normally this kind of work is done by retired shinobi or academy dropouts, but one of the usual teams was unavailable yesterday. Don't expect to do such duties often. Kurenai went over the entire scenario with them. We will train with another genin team for a while today. All 3 genin exchanged curious glances with their sensei. You wanted some help with your taijutsu Naruto and I got the right person to help you. He is the greatest taijutsu master of Konoha. I have to warn you though, the Jonin in question is a bit eccentric. The blonde deadpanned, so you want to say most of Konoha's Jonin, except you sensei, are oddballs? 2 green blurs burst into the clearing as soon as the genin finished speaking. The quiet was broken by a voice that was so loud it was almost booming. Very youthful of you Lee, you still need to train harder though, if you want to beat me. But never give up, you're a true genius of hard work. 2 individuals, both dressed in grotesque green spandex, were in front of Team 8. One of them was an adult, and the other was a child, perhaps a year or 2 older than them. The young boy almost resembled the man in miniature. As the smaller green-clad ninja shouted, "Thank you Guy. Sensei. If I can't train harder, I will run 100 laps around Konoha on my hands, and if I can't do that I will do 10,000 push-ups, and..." The man then turned to face the 3 members of Team 8 and said, "That's enough Lee." The 2 odd ninja then struck their best nice guy pose. I am Maeda Guy, Konoha's sublime green beast of prey and the eternal rival of the ever-hip and cool Kakashi Hitaki. And to my right is my most youthful pupil, Rock Lee. Shino, Hinata, and Naruto all gaped at the newcomers, thinking they were the strangest thing they had ever seen. They thought about being cursed or something, but wasn't Anko Sensei already awful enough? 2 more individuals entered the training area a short while later. A feminine voice called out in rage, "Guy. Sensei, I told you to wait for us." The strange Jonin pointed to the 2 newcomers and said, "Ah, and this are my other 2 youthful students, Tenten and Neji Hyuga." The moment Hinata heard the name Neji, she turned away from the ground and stepped back a few paces, partially concealing herself behind Shino. Everyone else registered with ease. Hinata. Sama. A chilly, haughty voice said. The girl stammered out the meek response, N. Neji.ni.san. The male Jonin spoke up once more before the atmosphere could become any more ominous. So Kurenai, who of those three requires my help to fan his flames of youth even brighter? Slowly, the blonde Jinchuriki held up his hand. With hesitation, he said, that would be me, I think. Some pointers in my taijutsu would be really useful. After a few minutes, the group was divided up, and Kurenai would tutor Lee in an effort to teach him how to break out of genjutsus. Tenten and Hinata would practice their weapon skills, Shino and Neji would spar, and Naruto would have a private session with the green-clad Jonin to practice his taijutsu. Before long, Guy and the Jinchuriki were standing on the edge of the clearing. The blonde was unsure of how to interpret the man. Despite being the most eccentric person Naruto had yet to meet, Kurenai Sensei had claimed to be the best taijutsu master in Konoha. The Jonin pulled 3 scrolls from his flak jacket and said, your sensei told me, what are you looking for? Each one contains a kata for a technique to grab and immobilize your enemies. Those are just basics, so you should be able to easily integrate them into your current forms. Furthermore, they can be extended through more complex maneuvers. For the next 3 hours I will supervise you in their use. Afterwards you can keep the scrolls and train on your own. Now let's start our youthful exercise. The blonde had a difficult few hours. Each kata required hundreds of repetitions, and nearly every time he made a mistake in his stance or technique, the Jonin corrected him. Naruto could see by now that the man was a taijutsu master. Additionally, Guy had criticized Naruto's entire taijutsu stance, arguing that it was merely a fighting style. However, the Jonin's complaints were largely ignored because the boy was content with his improvised style and had no intention of becoming an expert in melee combat. If Naruto wanted to, he could be very stubborn. The two teams said goodbye to one another at the conclusion of their combined training session. Neji raised his cold voice as Team 8 watched the others go. Hinata. Sama, you are even weaker than I presumed. Trying to steer away from the traditional Hyuga teachings will accomplish nothing. Fate has already decreed that you are nothing but a pathetic failure. You can't change what you are, no matter how hard you fight it. Even you with your clouded eyes should be able to see this truth. With each word the Hyuga spoke, Naruto became more and more agitated. The blonde began to clench his teeth, and by the time the speech was over, he was prepared to leap up and give this jerk a forceful punch to the face. The Jinchuriki felt a hand on his shoulder at this precise moment. He saw the tears welling up in Hinata's eyes as he turned around and saw sad lavender eyes meet angry blue ones. She indicated that the girl didn't want Naruto to start a fight because of her by shaking her head. Guy reprimanded the Hyuga, saying, Neji, that was really unyouthful of you. I told you not to bring up anything like that while we were here. I don't care about the problems you have with the main branch, but your behavior won't go unpunished this time. The boy walked slowly away from the training grounds, followed by his team and an irate sensei, without even turning around during the entire ordeal. Hinata turned around and fled as quickly as she could, tears streaming down her cheeks as soon as Team 9 was out of sight. The girl had already vanished from her team's line of sight into the woods around training ground 42 before anyone else could respond. Kurenai attempted to follow the upset girl, but Naruto held up his hand and began to talk. The blonde then quietly departed, attempting to find his female teammate. Sensei, I think that I probably can help Hinata better than you. I have known for almost as long as I can remember how it is to be treated like a worthless failure, so let me speak to her, please. Shino and the black-haired Jonin could only gaze at the blonde Jinchuriki's retreating back and hope that everything would work out. Hinata wasn't worthy of her family member's offensive remarks. Kurenai's demonstration of the fundamentals of tracking pleased Naruto. Hinata had left him a clear trail in her hasty flight, one that the blonde could easily follow. The boy saw his upset teammate a few minutes later. She was on her knees, sobbing and crying, and desperately trying to wipe the tears from her face with her hands. She actually appeared to be a complete mess. The boy was hurt to see her like this. No one should have to be in such a sorry state. He walked slowly toward her. He tried to alleviate her pain and suffering by pulling her into a consoling embrace as soon as he was within reach. The girl was stiff as a board in his arms at first, but she soon warmed up and seized his robe, tightly holding on to him. Then she burrowed her face into his chest and began to sob even louder than before. Naruto did his best to calm the young heiress's fears by saying, "It's going to be okay. Neji is wrong, you know." It wasn't until he started talking that Hinata realized who was assisting. Ordinarily, she would have passed out or been mortified by Naruto's behavior toward her, but by this time, she had gone well beyond that. All she wanted to do was relish the cozy embrace, which she had not experienced since her mother's passing so long ago. At the same time, Naruto began to doubt whether he was the best person to assist Hinata. Though it wasn't as if he had any experience calming someone's anxieties, he most likely understood the pain she was in. At times, such as now, the blonde's social skills were woefully inadequate. When he was similarly upset, he chose to listen to what he would have liked to hear. Don't let those dark thoughts cloud your mind, Hinata. You're much stronger than that. The girl gave Naruto his first response, but it wasn't the one he was hoping for. BB but H. He W. W. Was R. R. Right. I'm J. Just pages P. Pathetic A. A dot and everybody K. K. Knows it, I'm J. J. Just A B. B. Burden T.toe. Everyone. Don't you dare to think such bullshit. You are strong, you are better than Shino or I at Taijutsu. You are really good with those Senbon needles of yours and our team needs you. So don't you dare to believe any of the crap this bastard had spewed out. Naruto said what he intended to say. After recoiling at the blonde's outburst, Hinata asked in a low voice. WWYA. A dot or Y.UH. Helping M.ME. I'm N. Not W. W. Worth Y. Your time NNN Naruto. K.Kun. She was patted back by the Jinchuriki. You are my friend, my teammate, I will always help you, I will always believe in you, Datbeo. And don't forget Kurenai. Sensei and Shino, I am sure they feel the same way too. We're there for you, that is what friends are for, isn't it? The brunette was clearly calmed by the Jinchuriki's heartfelt speech. Her tears had ceased, and she had relaxed her hold on the blonde. However, as soon as Hinata realized her position, her face turned crimson red, and she quickly passed out in the boy's arms. Naruto felt the girl go limp and looked down, only to notice a tiny smile on her face and her red, puffy eyes closed. He felt reassured now that things would work out in the end. Naruto only needed to wait for the Hyuga girl to wake up after supporting her unconscious body against one of the nearby trees. The blonde first debated whether to bring the unconscious brunette back to the other members of Team 8, but ultimately he decided it would be best to wait for her to wake up. Giving his female teammate some time to cope with the entire situation which was caused by that one bastardo wouldn't hurt. The Jinchuriki clenched his jaw, recalling what had just transpired. He was undoubtedly prepared to beat someone to a bloody pulp for the second time since his return. Even before his brief adventure trip with Deidara, Naruto was aware that he was easily agitated. But these days, the blonde was willing to express his opinions to everyone, and if it meant getting beat up, then so be it. That couldn't be correct, could it? He shook his head. The demon host had gained some fresh insights into life during the months spent under Dei's guidance, but had the days spent away from his birthplace also caused him to let loose some pent-up rage? Naruto wasn't stupid. Well, he was probably a little dumb at times. Even so, he was aware that the years of being shunned and rejected by the village had left him with some negative emotions, but who wouldn't feel the effects of such cruelty? His temper was likely affected by the additional confinement that accompanied his return to Konoha. Before things got out of control, the blonde was relieved that Hinata had intervened. The lamp post had to be taken out of the stuck-up bastard's ass by someone, but that jerk Neji still deserved a good beating. Naruto's thoughts were interrupted by a moan. The Jinchuriki turned to face his female teammate, who was now stirring. Hinata opened her eyes and surveyed her surroundings. She was reminded of what had happened when she noticed Naruto leaning against one of the trees. Even though the girl was aware that Neji had serious issues with her, she was surprised that he would reprimand her so severely in front of his and her team. Although she was unhappy with her response to his insult, it had brought back a lot of unpleasant memories. She recalled being told how weak and useless she was by her father or the clan elders. Alternatively, she saw the disappointment in her father's eyes when her younger sister beat her, and Hanabi believed she was a waste of time. The Hyuga girl was deeply depressed by the memory of those terrible incidents. With a worried tone, Naruto questioned, "Are you happy to be awake again and feeling better, or would you prefer more time to gather yourself before we return?" The girl merely nodded and got herself up off the ground before they both began to move slowly and steadily toward the training area. On the way back, the blonde was the first to break the silence. "The stuck-up bastard isn't really your big brother." As Naruto talked about Neji, she could hear the frustration in his voice. Like a whisper, the Hyuga answered, My Circa cousin. T. There are some Circa conflicts between us." The heiress recoiled slightly when the male genin placed a hand on her shoulder. He then gave her one of his signature smiles, which caused the poor girl to blush a pale shade of pink. You don't need to tell me anything about those issues, Hinata. Just remember Shino, Kurenai. Sensei and I are there for you, if you need us. Thanks for stopping me, by the way. My anger got the better of me. Would have done something I would later regret, probably making him a piece of my art. Hinata asked, your art? In a bewildered tone. She had no idea what the boy was discussing at this point. Nothing. The blonde was a little anxious and, without realizing it, his response sounded a lot like Deidara's. To what extent had his brief journey impacted him? However, there was still hope as long as he didn't start teaching for hours about the beauty of his explosions. Both genin resumed their track back in silence following the odd, sudden end of their conversation. Shino and Kurenai were already waiting tensely for the blonde and the brunette when they eventually arrived at training ground 42. Both reassured her, like Naruto, that Neji was mistaken about her. Regardless of what others may think, she was a friend, a valuable comrade, and an important person to all three. The Hyuga girl's face lit up a little, and Team 8's concerns were allayed at least for the time being. Later, Hinata was lost in her thoughts as she drove home. She had been calmed by Naruto, Kurenai, and Shino's words of acknowledgement. She couldn't afford to be weak right now because she had friends and a team that depended on her. They trusted her and believed in her, so she needed to be strong, if not for herself, then at least for them. Those who trusted her with their lives would not be let down. On this day, Hinata promised herself that she would prove her father, her cousin, and her family wrong and that she would make her friends, sensei, and team proud. Everything was essentially back to normal on the following training day. Kurenai turned to face her students, who were seated in front of her in one of the training grounds craters. After her team finished their daily tasks, they would typically go on missions, but today the woman had other ideas. Rather than wasting a few hours chasing cats or weeding gardens, she wanted to make their training more intense. The Jonin wasn't entirely certain at the moment whether her team would compete in the Chunin exams, but that didn't mean she would take it easy on them. For all of them, the woman with the black hair had prepared a unique event. She pulled out a little scroll and unfolded it, then opened a small lunch, some rice balls, and water canteens for her group. The woman gave her team a comforting smile after she concluded her speech. Today there won't be any missions, instead we will extend your training by another 3 hours. I brought you some food. After we all have eaten, every one of you will get some special attention from me. Kurenai made 2 shadow clones to watch over her charges independently after everyone had finished eating. To allow each group to work independently of the others, she and her 2 copies divided the team up, with each Jonin guiding one of the genin to a different area of the training ground. Alongside Naruto. With a hint of curiosity in her voice, the woman asked, Naruto, I have seen what you were reading yesterday morning, so you started delving into the sealing arts. Any special reason for that? She hadn't anticipated that someone like the blonde boy would be interested in one of the most challenging ninja styles available. The Jinchuriki smiled at his teacher at the end of his explanation. You're right, sensei. I started learning Fuinjutsu a few days ago. In fact, there are 2 reasons for my choice. First, it's part of my heritage as Uzumaki, so I could at least try to honor my ancestors by learning it. Second, I thought it would be a good idea. Well, if I could make my own explosive tags, it will give me some more destructive power. Kurenai had anticipated the response from her genin after the Hokage had briefed her about the Uzumaki clan. Though he was already dangerous enough for her, the idea that the blonde could have a ton of explosive tags at his fingertips began to worry her. She was certain that the boy would learn sealing whether or not she helped him, so it wasn't like she could stop him anyway. The black-haired woman told Naruto, as you know, I am a genjutsu master, so I have very little experience with Fuinjutsu, but I can still help you with your studies. By this point, the boy was full of energy and always delighted to learn something that would improve his jutsus. Really, sensei? So what are we going to do? He asked. Kurenai smirked slyly at him. She took a blank scroll, an inkwell, and a brush out of one of her pouches and said, Oh, I doubt you will like this exercise. The examples of your handwriting that I have seen were terrible, for Fuinjutsu, although it needs to be clean and proper. So today you will do some basic calligraphy practice. Then she gave the items to the child. You can keep those utensils at the end of the lesson. All the blonde could do was moan. He had already read in his book that he needed to write neatly and steadily in order to create seals. Otherwise, they would burst in his face. However, he had not intended to begin addressing this weakness until he had read the entire manual. He started writing kanji under his sensei's careful supervision since there was nothing else to do. Alongside Hinata, the black-haired Jonin declared, the progress you have shown with Senbon is astonishing. Watching the last training sessions with your teammates, you were able to hit them with relative ease. So today I will be your opponent, don't hold back against me. Give it your all, Hinata. She then disappeared from the girl's line of sight. Iron needles were packed into the Hyuga girl's leg pouch, which she opened. She activated the Byakugan, slipped into a position that somewhat mirrored her Juken stance, and armed herself with 3 senbon per hand, a metal spike that is always between 2 fingers. Her hands resembled claws with the needles protruding between her knuckles. When the assault started, Kurenai was prepared because she knew what the girl was doing. It wasn't too difficult for her to dodge the projectiles because she wasn't a Jonin for nothing. Hinata, meanwhile, attacked her sensei repeatedly. Rinse and repeat after throwing 3 senbon simultaneously, changing hands, and removing fresh ammunition. If it weren't so lethal, the girl's fluid movements could have given the impression that she was constantly renewing her attacks. But the girl was stopped in her tracks by an unexpected attack. Clang! The Hyuga had not anticipated this counterattack from her sensei, but she was able to deflect the thrown kunai with the senbon in her left hand, and the weapon fell harmlessly to the ground. Kurenai advised her student, "You can't be so stationary, Hinata, you need to be on the move too sometimes. That is one of your current weaknesses, I will show you several more." The girl's right arm was swung in a direct attack by the black-haired Jonin, who appeared as if on cue. After making a swift sidestep to avoid the blow, Hinata put both of her senbon-filled hands forward in a stabbing motion. Her sensei had already disappeared once more and was nowhere to be found, even though the only thing she struck was nothing but air. Hinata heard Kurenai say, "Good, even when you try to stay away from your enemies, you always have to be prepared for close combat attacks." Because her opponent moved quickly, the Hyuga girl found it difficult to keep up with the Jonin's movements and failed to score a single hit during the entire battle. Hinata attacked the swiftly moving target again and attempted to seize 3 more needles, but none remained. Had she spent the 200 senbon in her pouch already? Already out of ammunition? "What are you going to do now?" she asked, making fun of her student's black hair. It was going to be a long and exhausting training day, the Hyuga girl sighed. Alongside Shino. "I have decided that you will be the one of my genin, who will learn how to wield genjutsu. You are the most suited for this fine art of all 3, Shino. Furthermore, you need to broaden your arsenal. Currently you mostly rely on your clan jutsus." Kurenai spoke with utter certainty. With a hint of concern in his voice, the Aburame asked, "Thank you, sensei. Why?" "Because you think I'm good enough to learn your most valuable art from you. Though are you sure that I am the right choice?" For a long time, the Jonin had considered who on her team would be taught to use genjutsu. By now, she had ensured that they were all able to identify and rid themselves of illusion. Although she was pleased that the blonde could now dispel illusions, Naruto was out of the question and most likely would never be able to do so. She had initially preferred Hinata because the girl possessed the chakra control needed to perform genjutsu, but the Hyuga heiress had already fallen in love with senbon, and the Jonin didn't want to divert her focus from that. Kurenai ultimately made the decision to teach Shino because the boy was intelligent and had sufficient chakra control. "Yes, you will learn genjutsu from me. I am sure you will make me proud, so don't doubt yourself and your abilities." Before speaking, the brown-haired genin bowed slightly in front of his sensei. "Then we should begin. There is much to learn for me, I am sure of that. You already know the basics of genjutsu, but I will give you a quick reminder. Illusionary techniques affect the enemy's senses and generate something you could call hallucinations. The more senses are targeted, the harder it gets to reveal the illusion." Kurenai took a moment to allow the information concept sink in. There are 2 different ways to cast a genjutsu onto someone. Either by affecting the person through one of his senses, the most common ways are vision or hearing, or through forcing your chakra directly into your victim's body, for example by a simple touch. In his typical monotone, Shino asked, "Then with which method do we start, sensei?" Although she wouldn't describe her student as overly emotional, the Jonin felt that he could be a little more enthusiastic. After all, that was Shino. "With the easiest way. You will lay your hands on my head and force a small amount of your chakra into me. Try to concentrate on my vision. I will give you continuous responses, how are you doing, and you can adapt your tries accordingly. This first steps are needed, so that you get the right idea and feeling how you must mold the chakra to have certain effects on your target's mind. No need to worry, you won't be able to hurt the real me. This body is only a shadow clone." Following that, the Aburame began his task. 3 days later, a 3-on-1 sparring match took place between Team 8. The real blonde watched the entire assault from the sidelines, assisting the melee attack team with kunai and shuriken while Hinata and 5 of Naruto's shadow clones engaged in close quarters combat with their sensei. Shino was encircled by a swarm of Kakaichu. As a lone figure entered the training ground, everyone stopped. The winded, black-haired Chunin said, "Kurenai-san, your team is required for an urgent mission. He then gave the Jonin Sensei a scroll. The man left the clearing after relaying the orders, saying, Hokage. Sama requested that you and your genin head out as soon as possible. Kurenai glanced quickly at the contents of the scroll before speaking in a firm voice. Gather everything you need for a short-term mission outside of the village, although pack lightly. We meet in 30 minutes at the main gates. Following their leader's prompt instructions, Naruto, Shino, and Hinata hurried out of Training Ground 42, attempting to prepare their essentials in the limited amount of time allotted. The first one to reach Konoha's main exit was the blonde Jinchuriki. It didn't take him long to prepare for the upcoming mission because his encampment was close to their regular training area. Within the next few minutes, his sensei and the rest of his comrades arrived. Kurenai had asked for a minimal package, and all three genin had only a bedroll and a lightly packed backpack. After making a simple hand gesture, the black-haired Jonin left with her three students in a standard triangle formation. Since the genin team had already been taught the fundamental sign language used by Konoha Nin during their academy years, they had no trouble understanding what her sensei had indicated. As he and his group were jumping from tree to tree, a curious Naruto asked, So sensei, what is this emergency mission all about? Without even looking back, Kurenai began to speak. We have to apprehend 3 fugitive Konoha citizens, alive if possible. Those 3 have embezzled almost 1 million ryo from Konoha's official accounts over the last months. The bewildered blonde genin asked, Is such a mission not normally assigned to an Anbu Hunter Nin squad? Kurenai was about to respond when the Aburame boy spoke up. I think you are mistaken here, Naruto. Because sensei only said fugitive citizen not ninja, therefore a squad of genin should be sufficient. Hokage. Sama surely wouldn't waste Anbu on a trivial task, like capturing criminal civilians. The Jonin praised her subordinate, saying, Excellent perception Shino. Although those 3 have a bit of a ninja training. In fact you 3 probably know them. Our targets are the members of the former Team 4, which graduated in the same class as you. They dropped out of the shinobi program, after they failed the real genin test and were afterwards employed in one of the administrative offices of Konoha. Hinata's question was, Can you tell us their names, Kurenai, sensei? Kurenai almost immediately responded, Do you remember Amy, Kasumi, and Fuki? Given that they were a notorious group of school bullies, all members of Team 8 could remember those 3 women. During the academy, Naruto, Hinata, and Shino had some unpleasant experiences with those girls because they were all perceived as outsiders. After she listed the names of their targets, the black-haired Jonin could practically feel the negative vibes emanating from her team. Kurenai knew the general direction the 3 criminals were traveling through the mission file. Hinata, activate your Byakugan periodically and scan the surroundings for them. Shino, spread out your Kakaichu and let them look for any traces. The same goes for you Naruto. I want 10 of your shadow clones to survey the area. Even though they were 1 day ahead of the skilled ninja, that wouldn't matter. The 3 genin responded in unison, Hi, sensei, and began working on their designated tasks. After searching for about 4 hours, Naruto brought the group to a halt. One of my clones has found them, afterwards he dispelled. They are about 1 kilometer to the northwest, resting in the open. Team 8 Jonin. Sensei responded, Lead the way then. You 3 will surround them and capture the targets on your own. No lethal force, if not necessary. This goes double for you, Mr. Short. Fuse, I am sure you remember our last talk. We don't need another of your messy explosions. Even though the blonde genin knew his teacher was correct, a frown still formed on his face, especially since he disliked the moniker she had given him. The team quickly reached the spot where Naruto's clone had discovered, and it was evident that the 3 wanted women were sitting in the clearing. The time had come to apprehend the runaways. Kurenai used hand signals to guide her genin to their appropriate locations. The 3 ninjas shifted into the tree's shade. They waited anxiously for their sensei to give the all-clear to begin. Naruto, Shino, and Hinata hurried in as soon as they got the go. Innumerable insects rose into the air from the Aburame's sleeves, creating an insect wall. In the meantime, the blonde Jinchuriki created a blockade by conjuring 12 solid copies. As the assault started, the 3 gangster girls screamed and froze. They made a grave error by assuming they were safe here. They had no way out on 2 sides because the path was either blocked by a wall of Narutos, all of whom were holding kunai, or by a swarm of bugs. The only way out was via the Hyuga heiress, who was prepared for battle. Come on, Fuki, Kasumi, we can take the weak, pale-eyed freak. Ami's voice trembled a little as she attempted to sound powerful and menacing. When the girl brandished a kunai and charged at Hinata, her accomplices did the same. A careless kunai swipe ducked beneath the Hyuga girl. The weapon in the girl's hand fell to the ground as she smoothly closed several tenketsu on Ami's arm. The purple-haired assailant retreated a few paces, and her companions halted their progress. Now her entire right arm hung pointlessly in midair. Amy glared at the girl with the lavender eyes in front of her before charging forward once more and attempting to hit with her left arm, which was still working. This attack was easily sidestepped by Hinata, who avoided the blow by lightly tapping her opponent's right knee. Amy slammed into the dirt, head first, and remained there in reaction to the counter. The other two girls, whose hands Naruto and Shino had bound, could only watch in disbelief as their leader was easily vanquished by the shy Hyuga. After witnessing this display, neither of the two resisted being captured. The young Kunoichi continued to stand in her Juken stance, keeping a close eye on Ami's fallen form. Until the final enemy was safely taken, she would not move a meter away. The blonde Jinchuriki went over to the two of them and knelt next to the girl who had fallen. Amy shifted slightly, holding a kunai in her left hand, and he only wanted to begin slipping the rope around her right arm. The purple-haired girl had landed on the kunai she had dropped during her initial attack, as Hinata had observed. However, this final desperate action was unexpected by the female genin. The Hyuga girl hurried forward as soon as she saw her teammate being attacked. She struck Ami's chest with her Juken powered palm with all of her might. The hit woman's body skidded back a few meters. Blood-red foam erupted from Ami's mouth and a damp gurgling sound could be heard. She then began to convulse, but she stopped a few seconds later, and then there was just silence. All Hinata could do was gaze at the lifeless body that lay on the ground a few paces ahead of her. The Hyuga could practically see what had happened as a result of her vicious attack because the Byakugan was still active. Amy died in a matter of seconds after parts of her heart and lungs liquefied. No one could have survived that. The brunette was stunned and likely wished she would faint for the first time, but today the gods were unforgiving. Meanwhile, after witnessing her friend's horrific death, Fuki and Kasumi had passed out on the ground. Though you could see the worry it concealed if you looked good enough, Shino watched over the two fallen bodies with almost no emotion on his face. Naruto was shocked, but not because he had to witness the death struggle, rather, he was accustomed to this. He assumed Hinata's actions were instinctual, but the Jinchuriki simply hadn't anticipated that she would attempt a fatal blow. A storage scroll was thrown to her blonde genin by Kurenai as she entered the clearing. She then pulled the motionless Hinata away from the scene of the incident, saying, "Naruto, Shino, secure the prisoners and set up a camp somewhere in the surroundings, however far enough away from here." Hours later, when night had already descended, Naruto was reflecting on the recent development while sitting by the campfire. He had offered to be the first person on the night watch. The blonde was too reckless once more and wasn't entirely sure if the entire mess wasn't his fault. However, he was aware that such incidents frequently occur on missions. The woods were hushed in eerie silence on this new moon night, which was completely dark. Without the fire's light, the Jinchuriki would not even be able to see the hand in front of his face, leading him to believe that the rest of his team and the prisoners were asleep. The boy was startled by a sudden noise and tightened his grip on the kunai. The Hyuga girl said, "It's just M.Me, and Naruto, K.Kun. I circa C. Can't S. Sleep." Her voice was hardly audible above a whisper. The male genin answered thoughtfully, "You can sit by the fire with me, if you want." The boy decided to wait until the girl began talking on her own because he was unsure of how to approach Hinata about what had transpired with Amy. Thus, both teenagers sat around the campfire in silence for nearly an hour. At last, the brunette's voice came up. How to y.ud.do it. Naruto did his best not to sound annoyed, but the question still sounded rather odd to him, and waiting until the heiress was ready to speak to him had not improved his mood. "How'd I do what?" he asked. "Why? UL. Looked so circa calm, back then W. When you K. Killed. A and I just F. Feel so G. Guilty. I C. Can still see her F. Face every time I circa close my eyes." Hinata sounded almost broken now. Her question almost made Naruto smile because he had asked Deidara a similar question. Flashback: a few days had passed since Naruto had killed the bounty hunters. He was now eating some of his rations, and he and the bomber had just made camp for the night. Deidara. "Sensei, I wanted to go away, the guilt, the images, the nightmares. How do you deal with it? I want to feel nothing at all. I know it was necessary, so why does it trouble me so much?" The blonde genin begged for a response. The missing nin's face assumed an odd expression, and he gazed off into space with distant eyes. "You learn to deal with it, I know this sounds stupid, However, you get somewhat used to it. You will be able to deal with eventually, but it takes time. The response was almost wise. There is one thing although, hope that you will always feel regret and guilt about your actions. Even though we ninjas are killers, we are still also humans. Pray that you never lose those emotions. Kai flashback. Naruto inhaled deeply and said, the feelings never go away, Hinata. You just learn how to deal with them better. The blonde approached the Hyuga girl and placed his hand on her shoulder, saying, I had nightmares for more than a week after my first kill. Even now, sometimes the faces of my victims pop up in my head. He then gave her a comforting shoulder squeeze before saying, eventually you will be able to handle it, though always remember, as long as you feel something while you kill, you are still a human being. Kurenai. Sensei probably told you something similar, but this is an experience which you have to overcome alone. Nobody can help you with it. Now you should go back to sleep, you will need it tomorrow. Shino startled both of his teammates by emerging from the shadows. You should also go to sleep, Naruto. Why? Because it's my turn of the night watch now. After wishing Shino a good night, the blonde and the brunette rose from the floor and fell asleep.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.